We are united in diversity. We are very heterogeneous in our opinion.
We are doing this in our open democracies. Discussion is all open and loud, and I'm not for that.
What is European Union? What is freedom? How we learn together.
The obvious question is, what is the EU doing? What is our plan?
Good morning and welcome to day 2 of Politico's Competitive Europe Summit. My name is Douglas Busvine. I'm Politico's trade editor. And I just want to get you in a good mood. Looking forward to today's discussions. I have the privilege of welcoming you to day 2 of the summit. We will be discussing topics ranging from the shape of the transatlantic alliance in the Donald Trump era, new opportunities for trade and investment and international partnerships, the next MFF, and stronger cooperation across public and private sectors to foster growth across the bloc. Well, we've lined up a series of fantastic panels and interviews with top-notch policymakers and industry leaders. You will hear from Jovita Neliupčiene, ambassador to the United States of the European Union. We hope she's on her way. Plane slightly delayed. We have Kerry Morgan, Trade Commissioner for Europe for the United Kingdom, Turkish Ambassador Faruk Kaymakçı, and Gelsomina Viliotti, Vice President of the European Investment Bank, and many more. But before we kick it off, I'd like to thank our partners for making the summit possible. So here we go. Our leading partners are ASML, Bayer, FPIA, and Google. The presenting partners are Lilly, DP World, Revolut, and Santander, and our knowledge partner is the McKinsey Global Institute. Just a little bit of housekeeping here. Politico, we love a good debate here in the room and on stage and online. So please share your thoughts with us on platforms like X, Blue Sky, LinkedIn, all the rest. Not TikTok, maybe TikTok. Please use our hashtag Politico Competitive Summit. One session will include a Q&A for our audience here in the room. So that session will be indicated on the program, and our moderator will let you know when the Q&As will take place. For this session, a roving mic will be doing the rounds. And during our networking breaks, our reporters and Politico Pro staff, support staff, I should say, are in the corridors to connect. You can also explore our partners' installations and meet fellow attendees. So, to kick off our program, we have some high-level speakers here in Brussels to discuss how the transatlantic relationship between the EU and the USA is taking shape under the new, my script says, new geopolitical scenario. The Donald Trump administration, of course, and his new trade agenda. Camille Geis, Politico's excellent star trade reporter based here, will be guiding the conversation. So thank you for joining, and we hope you have a great day. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Politico's Competitive Europe Summit. So my name is Camille Geis, and I'm a trade reporter at Politico. No other relationship has been as vital to European and American peace and prosperity in the post-war era as the transatlantic relationship. Yet, with the US administration's pivot to a more inward-facing foreign and trade policy, the core tenets of this partnership are now being reassessed on both sides of the Atlantic. So what will it take to rebuild trust, deepen trade ties, and shape a mutually beneficial transatlantic agenda for the years ahead? So this is something that we will explore with our panelists today. So I'm going to introduce you all to Malte Lohan, the CEO of the American Chamber of Commerce to the European Union, AmCham EU. Matthias Jorgensen, the head of unit for the US and Canada and acting director for the Americas, Agriculture and Food Security at the European Commission's DG Trade. The ambassador Jovita Nelupciene, so the EU's ambassador to Washington, is joining us shortly. Her plane has been delayed, so it is what it is. And also Matthias Jorgensen has another commitment in a few minutes, so he'll have to leave us a bit early, which gives plenty of room to hear from Malte Lohan as well. So thank you so much both for joining me today. I'd like to kick off our conversation by zooming out a little bit and speak about the so-called Turnberry system that US Trade Representative Jamieson Greer touted on the heels of the agreement that was sealed in Scotland between the EU and the United States at the end of July. So I'm sure you are familiar with his op-ed that was published in early August, where the Ambassador Greer speaks about, and I quote, a new economic order that's been solidified at Turnberry, and he's praising the imposition of tariffs as a mean to rebalance a trade deficit. So Ambassador Greer frames the Turnberry system as this new system who is going to privilege national interest and use tariff as a policy tool, moving away from this reliance on the rules-based trading system. So, Matthias, I'd like to hear from you first. How do you read this shift? And would you say that the EU is sort of ready to accept this trading order where this kind of bilateral leverage and the more frequent use of tariffs is going to play a bigger role moving forward?
Thanks, Camille, and thanks for the invitation. But I think it's a good start. We do what is in our interest, and what the EU really sees as its interest is to have very strong trade relations around the world. And to nurture and protect those trade relations. And that's why we did the deal with the US. We had a situation in which we have a very, very important trade and investment relationship. We had a situation in which there was a destabilization of it. And we had the very clear messages from the people and the constituencies that we are accountable towards, the member states, the European Parliament, EU business, that they wanted to have stability and certainty back, to protect the millions in jobs, the thousands of firms who are engaged in that. So that was our interest. That's the interest we pursued towards the US, and I think we have managed to stabilize it, and we can come back to that later. At the same time, it is our clear view that trade partners around the world are looking for the kind of predictability and certainty that rules-based trade gives. And that's why we see other countries, who of course also have to deal with a US that is stepping back from its WTO commitments, are very interested in and are working for maintaining rules-based trade amongst themselves through FTAs. And for example, we, as you know, have proposed the FTAs with Mercosur and with Mexico, and Mercosur we hope very much to get done and signed and enter into force before Christmas. And we have concluded negotiations with Indonesia, and we will continue down that road. And at the same time, we will also do our very best to maintain and develop the WTO and strike partnerships with other regional groupings like the CPTPP. So for us, as I said, we will definitely continue to pursue our interest, and our interest is in rules-based trade. We do that very, very tenaciously and very, very assertively.
Yeah, and this feeds into the whole diversification agenda that
exactly.
you were, and as well as the CPTPP collaboration. But so, because I feel like, there was a bit of, misconception, or at least people weren't very sure of why is it that at the end of the day, the European Union accepted this so-called lopsided deal, this unbalanced trade deal. Would you say that it's indeed to make sure we would keep the Trump administration engaged when it comes to the war in Ukraine, or was it something that, was not as part of the calculations?
I think there's several very important elements. As I said, there was a real wish for certainty and stability.
Yeah.
But I think we also did the deal because the deal we have done is something that maintains our competitive position on the US market. We understand it with the tariffs which are in place, and I think we got something that still allows EU companies to compete on the US market if you compare to the US firms. But we also managed to maintain our competitive position in relation to other trading partners. And I think that was really the key issue. And then, of course, the relations with the US are very strong, they're very broad, and all these decisions take place in a larger policy framework in which you have trade elements, you have economic elements, you have security elements. I think that's quite clear.
Yeah, and I'd like to bring in Malte Lohan from AmCham. How would you see this evolving relationship? Do you think we are indeed entering this new, because we were talking about the Turnberry system, right? Do you think we are indeed entering this new area of our trade and foreign relations with the US? And what do you make of this, unbalanced deal to some extent?
Well, good morning, everybody. First of all, I'm glad to be with you. I prefer not to put a label on where we are today. I feel we're in a period of flux, and the jury's out, what the future looks like. Certainly, what businesses on both sides of the Atlantic have been struggling with since the beginning of this year, more than in a long time, is uncertainty. And I know this is a well-rehearsed slogan. Everybody has heard this before, but it doesn't make it any less true that this is a major problem. When a company is looking at its future growth plan and the investment it needs to make, uncertainty is toxic because you don't know where you're going to generate your future income. And that just chills economic growth and it chills economic dynamism. So that's bad news. And therefore, it was absolutely imperative to find some way to stabilize the situation. Now, the joint statement is not the ideal scenario that we would have liked to see.
Yeah.
I think for different reasons than those that are perhaps more the public conversation, because we recognize that there was no better alternative on the table. In an ideal world, of course, business always likes to see lower or zero tariffs. And that has been our position from day one when the negotiations between Europe and the US started. We would like to see essentially a zero tariff zone across the Atlantic, and we've been very clear on this from the beginning. But we also recognize that was just not on the table. And so the alternative to 15% was not zero tariffs. The alternative to 15% was 30% tariffs.
Yeah.
That would have been the reality today. And the alternative would have been an immediate retaliation by the EU on 93 billion euros worth of exports from the US. That would have triggered a spiral of escalation. God knows where we would be today in the transatlantic relationship.
Yeah.
And I think we have to be honest. This is not the reality that we like, but it is here. And so against that context, the deal certainly provides more stability than would have been the case otherwise. It does also create a basis for Europe and the US to now move forward and actually do meaningful progress on a number of areas which the business community is interested in. And I'm sure we'll talk about some of these in a moment. So really the message now is use the deal to move forward. We cannot allow that to unravel and go back to the uncertainty that we were in before.
But, based on what you're saying, I'm interested in understanding how worried you are about, US companies based in Europe and that this asymmetry at the end of the day could turn into more pressure onto their European operations, right? Like, how worried are you about this kind of reshoring agenda from the US administration?
Look, I think it's important to understand the transatlantic economy, what does that look like in practice? So, of course, it is the largest trading relationship in the world by far. But if we only look at it through the lens of trade, so goods flowing across the Atlantic, we're actually completely missing the point. The real importance of the relationship is the sales of the European units of American companies in Europe and the American units of European companies in the United States. So it's businesses selling through their local subsidiaries on both sides of the Atlantic. In fact, collectively, we are selling 5 times as much through our local subsidiaries as we are trading across the Atlantic. Of course, trade is important, right? But there is a lot more in the relationship, and that is underpinned by the biggest investment relationship in the world. Yeah. So the US is by far the largest foreign investor into Europe. Europe is by far the largest foreign investor into the US, more than the rest of the world combined in both cases. That is a huge asset for both economies, right? And a lot of American companies, now speaking for our members, build on the transatlantic marketplace as a way to project their competitive strength across the world. It's, of course, their home market which matters, but it's the combination of the United States and Europe which really gives them an incredibly strong competitive position also across the rest of the world. And if you think about sectors like defense, like digital, like energy, like pharmaceuticals, many of the American companies have huge presence here in Europe. For decades, in some cases, more than 100 years, manufacturing here with local supply chains here, local staff here, and using their presence here and their presence in the United States together to actually generate the strongest economic position in the marketplace. And I think that's what we want to preserve, and that's where the stability that is now coming back is just so essential.
Yeah, thank you so much, Malte. I hear that the ambassador just managed to join us from the airport, so I'd like to welcome her to the floor. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Ambassador. Thank you so much, Ambassador Neluptiene, for coming over after a flight.
Thank you. Apparently, we still lag the investments in transport sector.
So I hope the Brussels traffic was not too harsh on you. So I'd like to perhaps, before we move on into the next part of this conversation, where we'll talk about the implementation of the agreement per se, I'd like to also bring in your first-hand experience of your time in the United States and understand from you also, what you make of this agreement that was sealed with Washington. Would you say that this, asymmetry to some extent was a price worth paying to keep the Trump administration engaged on the war in Ukraine?
Well, first of all, I think that deal is important, just as it was mentioned, because we have this massive relations, not only in trade and investment, but be it security, be it research, be it people-to-people contact. There's always the context in which any kind of the trade deal is made. I think that should be taken into account. Another element, of course, we do believe that this on this deal depends quite a lot of other countries, because it's 1 to 3. Probably we were a third or fourth to make a deal with the United States, and it becomes kind of a framework, an example for the others, and I think kind of to stabilize the market forces, if you wish, and I think that's extremely important. Volatility in the global market is not the key, because we probably have to have in account that actually US is the largest consumer market, so everybody always will want to be there. Everybody wants to have access to the market, and everybody wants to have clarity, probably, if not stability, so at least clarity what rules of the games are. And I think this is, when we think about alternative, this probably summarize the sense.
Yeah. I see Matthias was nodding, hearing from the ambassador when you were talking about the broader context as well. And so this, sort of also brings us to the more concrete implications of the agreement, right? And I'd like to touch upon the implementation as such, because I'm sure this is also something that our audience is really interested in, and understanding, what comes next in the relationship and in the deal. So broadly, the US is basically carrying its end of the trade deal. It's implementing tariff reductions on car, on aircraft, and parts, and it's been confirming that European pharmaceuticals won't be subjected to the 100% threat from last week. So, Matthias, I'd like to bring your insights here, and I'm sure many people in the audience will be interested in hearing how the negotiations are going when it comes to wine and spirits. Are you confident that they will be exempted too from the tariffs from the US?
Yeah, thanks a lot. I think what we have on the table is a deal. It's in the joint statement. That's what we're implementing now. We took very rapidly the steps that we had to take in the side of the EU. We made proposals still in August to lower tariffs and open some very limited, carefully calibrated tariff rate quotas for certain seafood and certain agricultural products.
Yep.
That is now going through the co-legislators. The Council is looking at it, the European Parliament is looking at it, we are trying to help them. We look at the US, they have also upheld their side of the bargain until now. They have taken a number of executive orders and decisions, and there will be the retroactive application of 15% of cars, for example, and and there are exemptions. Also, notably in the area of aircraft, generic pharmaceuticals, and certain natural products. I think we now have two tasks, and I think one task is that we need to ensure that we both keep on living up to the spirit of the agreement. We have stability, we have certainty. There's a 15% ceiling on EU exports in general. That needs to be maintained and not hollowed out. We are looking very carefully at what the US is doing. We're monitoring that very closely. And I must say, we are concerned about the steps that are taken and the possibilities which exist in the US system to expand the area of goods which contain steel and aluminum derivatives to increase tariffs. That is some concern. But we're discussing with the US to see how to ensure that the statement is implemented in accordance with the letter and the spirit. Okay, there are teething problems, but we're in very constant contact with them. Then we got the joint statement as such, which contains lots of pointers to other areas, and I think there's a possibility to enter into a lot of interesting discussions. It's a platform, as Malte said, for further engagement, and for, I think, what should really be the focus of both sides of the Atlantic, and that is serving the many people on both sides, and many firms on both sides, which benefit and which draw their livelihood from this very vibrant and deep and broad trade relationship.
So you say that you are worried about the situation around the steel, the derivative of steel, and a 50% being imposed onto them. How concretely do you expect a proposal coming up from the European side to really, sort of talk this through, or what are the next steps there?
We believe that the US is taking some very clear commitments for a 15% ceiling. That has to be the overall rule, and that cannot be hollowed out.
Yeah, okay. So then my other question is that we understand that now the European Commission is moving forward with imposing, reducing the imports of foreign steel while increasing the tariffs there. Do you think that brings us closer to, a solution on tackling overcapacity with the United States?
I think this is one of the actions from the EU which will help us implement the joint statement and tackle some joint challenges. What's the situation? We have joint challenges as the EU and the US, that there's overcapacity and there's unfair practices in the production of steel. I think as a responsible economic actor, we need to take action to address that. So that's why we will come forward with a proposal which will limit the amount of steel that can be imported into the EU tariff-free. And that will be the basis upon which we will then pursue what is set out in the joint statement. Together with the US, we'll try to ring fence our steel production, and also thereby hopefully be able to achieve the normalization of trade in steel across the Atlantic, and get rid of the US tariffs, which for the moment are very high on EU steel exports, and which are probably in the vast majority of cases simply leads to higher prices on the US market, because the steel that the US is importing from Europe is not the bulk steel, the basic materials, it's specialized steel that you need in the US to build roads, to build factories, to build pipelines, all these kind of things. So we believe there's a joint interest, and that's one of the areas that we're very keen to move forward on very rapidly with the US.
Yeah, and so do you think that to some extent we might see, a renewal of the general steel and aluminium agreement, or it's not really the priority on the US side currently?
I think the US will be very interested in starting these conversations with us. I think the moment that we have our proposal, the moment we have a good indication of how co-legislators look at it, I think we'll have a strong platform upon which we can engage with the US.
Okay, sounds good. I see, Malte, you'd like to add something to this.
Yes, thank you. And so I think, first of all, important to recognize that both parties in this are moving forward in good faith.
Yeah.
And I really want to make a point. This is happening. This is happening from the European Commission side. It is happening from the US administration. Matthias just mentioned the steps that have been taken to enact the first commitments which were set out in the joint statement. Now, it's also important to recognize, out of the 19 points that are covered in the joint statement, only 3 cover tariffs. The joint statement is about a lot more than tariffs. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the conversation that is making headlines is about the perceived asymmetry around the tariffs. Yeah. We also need to look at the other parts of the agreement to really understand where the potential for future progress lies. Mm-hmm. And we polled our members a couple of weeks ago to understand where the priorities in the American business community were when it comes to implementation. Number one, no surprise, we would like to see an expanded category of sectors and products which are subject to lower or zero tariffs. We think there's a clear mechanism in the joint statement which allows that, and we are very keen for the two sides to continue to make progress on that. But the number 2 point, and this is what I wanted to add here, is that an important part for the business community is what we call here in Brussels regulatory simplification, and what the joint statement calls non-tariff barriers. And there are a number of policy areas that are mentioned in the joint statement, such as CS3D, CSRD, EUDR, CBAM, which are considered by the US administration to be non-tariff barriers that the EU should be tackling in order to address some of them, the perceived imbalance from the US administration's perspective. We have for years, as the business community in Europe, called for those regulations to be improved so that the implementation can be easier for companies and the burden can be reduced. I think it's really important that we don't lose sight of why Europe is doing this work around regulatory simplification. There is a link to the joint statement, and I do recognize that for the US administration this is important. But the reason we have to do this in Europe is not because it's being required by the US administration, it's because Europe has to get this right. And I'm really not seeing enough ambition and urgency today in the way that the simplification agenda is being handled by the co-legislators. I know the Commission is keen to move forward on this, but we need to see faster progress on that.
Thank you so much, Malte. I think the time has now come for Matthias to leave us. He has to go to the council. So thanks so much, Matthias. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Laura.
Thanks. I'd like to perhaps, yes, come closer. I think for me, I'd like to come back to the regulatory pressure just in the last part of our conversation, but the questions around steel and aluminium, of course, triggered some questions, are triggered by some questions on China, right? And so, the US ambassador to the EU, so sort of your counterpart, Andrew Puzder, said earlier this week that he found more alignment in the EU on having a joint recognition on the threats on China than he had expected. So, Ambassador Nelupchine, how much would you say that Washington and Brussels currently align on around how to cooperate around China, especially when it comes to its support of Russia? Do you think that the fact that the EU is taking more steps into sanctioning Chinese company is sort of, a way for, like, a move in the direction of the White House in a way?
Well, I think that the understanding of the threat or what is the assessment of Chinese role, not only in the national security or security and defense, but as well in the which you have just touched about overcapacity and economic security. I think that we are on the same page. President von der Leyen already more than 2 years ago said that we have to de-risk, and this was aligned with the previous administration and even more so with the current administration. And this priority is bipartisan in the United States. I think that for us it's very clear. We have invested quite a lot of our political and expertise capital, so to say, in order to prepare ourselves and to have a right trade defense instruments, which now is the question, of course, to when and how to use them. And I think that this is where the area where probably American expectation lies. First of all, when we speak about national security and defense, I think it's pretty clear. President Trump himself several times commented that the pressure should go to those who are enabling the war, the countries like China. He mentioned India as well. First of all, the money which comes from the buying energy sector. And I think that we should not shy away and recognize that over there, now we are discussing, the member states are discussing the 19th sanction package, which Commission presented a week ago. We should not shy away with that we have done a huge work. Maybe it's not tariffs, what the President Trump is mentioning, but I think that the measures are almost as painful as the tariffs can be, and they are there. They are already in the 17, 18, and now going to be the 19 sanction package. And we should not really kind of underestimate the impact. We saw a couple of weeks ago, Russia announced an increase of VAT. Their reserves are depleted. Yes, the country is too big to default immediately, but I think that falling into the trap that everything is fine with Russian economy is as well not the best choice. The more we discuss, the more we cooperate on that, and the more we put the maximum pressure. Different tools may be used, and we saw in the G7 statement earlier. Over the night. Sorry, I missed the time frame. That is very clear that to put in place the tariff measures. Trade measures, sorry,
the trade measures.
Trade measures,
yeah,
not
voilà,
tariffs.
exactly. And I wanted to follow up on that because exactly the EU would never go down the road of imposing such a high tariff, right, on China and India because they enable Russia's war on Ukraine. That's not an option for us.
Well, I think that what is most important is actually to decide what we are going to do here and what is our aim overall. The first and the most important element is to make sure that Russia does not have funds to support or to continue the war in Ukraine. That's the main element. Then the secondary question is already what kind of measures. If one country prefers to have tariffs, well, probably that's their way to choose. We prefer to go to a different way, actually to go through the whole supply chain, not to let the transactions happen through the certain banks, which are sanctioned and will be sanctioned, not to let refineries to be involved. Second largest Indian refinery was sanctioned already in the previous sanction package. The companies in the entities maybe in the Central Asia should probably will look at all the enablers, and then we go all the way down to how this energy resources actually reach the countries which are paying. So all the shadow fleet, it's not that because we don't like some kind of ships, no, because it's part of the supply chain, and we go all down to the supply chain to make sure.
Sorry, to make sure.
To make sure that that actually inflicts the cost.
Exactly. And so, as you said, the 19th sanctions package is currently under negotiation. Are you hopeful we'll have a deal, in the within the month of October? If you had to kind of.
Well, it's in the hands of the member states, and I have to be careful what I promise.
That's too diplomatic an answer. I can't accept it.
I hope it as well. I had a meeting and asked a very similar question. It's imminent.
It's imminent. Okay, well, and on that note, I'd like to bring in Malte for, to kick off the sort of last part of our conversation. Looking forward, what are the next battles ahead, and the regulatory pressure that you mentioned earlier, and the simplification agenda. So we are going to see further disruptions from the White House. I think it's no secret to anybody. Earlier this week, Ambassador Puzder stressed again how much the EU and the US should discuss rules such as the Digital Services Act, the Digital Markets Act. He also said that the CSDDD and the CSRD, are impediments to trade. So you think that, to some extent, Ambassador Puzder sort of, nailed it in his reading of the situation of where we are in terms of the EU's rule book, and because I also saw a survey from AmCham earlier this week that a majority of business still perceive US policy as having a negative impact on their operations moving forward. So it goes a bit both ways, right?
Yeah, we asked our members in the same survey that I mentioned before how they see the implications of current policies by the EU and current policies by the US affecting their operations in Europe.
Yeah.
And the answer in both cases was not great. You can see the results
ideal.
on our website.
Yeah.
You have a majority of American businesses in Europe saying the current policies on both sides of the Atlantic are not helping. Now, I think what's really important is, first of all, we fully support the ability of any country in the world, and the same goes for the EU, to regulate the way it wants to. It is the EU's prerogative to set the rules the way the EU wants, just as it is the US's and Canada's and Brazil's and everybody else's. And we really would like that prerogative to be respected and to be recognized. The second point that's important is, as American companies operating in Europe, one of the main reasons why Europe is such an attractive place to do business is because the single market treats everybody the same.
Yeah.
And we do benefit from this, from the fact that it's a level playing field where the same rules apply for all. It's a very important part of our commitment to Europe for decades. Now, what we have to recognize, of course, is that we are in a partnership between Europe and the United States, which is so closely integrated that regulations that we may take here in Europe or that the US may take at home, they have consequences for each other. And I'll give you one example, which is the CSDDD, the supply chain law. We fully support the objective of supply chain due diligence. And there is no American company that is asking for kind of exemption for an American company just because it happens to be American. What we have a problem with is that this law has a stated extraterritorial component, which means a subsidiary of any company that happens to be doing business in Europe, in Australia, for activities that are entirely outside of any nexus with the EU are still subject to EU regulations. Okay, this is the extraterritorial component, and it's by design. The law is trying to fix problems across the world even though some of those problems are fully outside of the normal kind of parameter of regulation that the EU has scope to regulate.
And it goes both ways, right? Like the US also has this kind of...
And that is really a fundamental problem wherever it comes from, right? And our role is here in Brussels to call this out. And so we do need to see this extraterritorial component as one of the examples of the regulatory burdens to be resolved, because it is interfering with the way that companies operate across the world, where they have to know which rules apply, and you cannot have, you cannot be subject to rules in Australia and the European rules that somehow apply through the back door to you when they are in conflict with each other. It just doesn't work. That's why you have to resolve this extraterritorial conflict between European legislation and others.
Yeah, Ambassador.
Well, I think that there is one thing when we speak very theoretically about extraterritorial, but I think when we speak about, tracking down the supply chain, I don't know how we, for example, will actually do if someone imports something which is a forced labor, child labor, or even some other human rights violations. So it's not an extraterritorial as such, it's just to make sure that your supply chains are clean of those kind of things. So I think that I really support the idea that we have simplify, and I think that as you pointed earlier, it's extremely important. It's not really, doesn't matter who actually points out or nails down what could be done and how to ease their administrative burden, how to make sure that there is no overlaps in the reportings, how to make sure that actually everything what is done cost as little as possible for business, that we really unleash the capacity to innovate of the companies who work here. But I think that we have to be really very precise what are we doing. We have not only sustainability packages, which all those regulations have been mentioned comes in. We have another 6 packages coming in with the omnibus. Hopefully, actually, they will move with lightning speed with some other co-legislators, because it's really needed for European business, not only for American companies here.
Yeah, totally. Right of response.
This is exactly the point. So the moment your supply chain is connected to the European market, EU legislation should apply. This is the point about respecting the regulatory autonomy. What I'm saying is the CSDDD is one example of legislation, and there are others where the legislation tries to apply to business practices which have no nexus at all with the EU, just because the mother company happens to have operations in Europe. And I think this is what we have to disentangle, right? This notion that you may be doing business outside of the European Union, and some of your business may never interact with the European market. Europe cannot tell everybody else in the world that everybody else has to apply the European standards on whatever it might be. And this is, by the way, is a big issue for American companies, but it's the same big issue for companies from many other markets across the world, and we are in constant dialogue with them. This is not an EU-US conversation.
Exactly, exactly. So I'm looking at the time, and technically I should be doing the conclusion remarks, but I'd like to hand it over to you both, actually. So do you think that looking forward, this agreement is sort of, shifting the way the EU is doing trade policy moving forward, taking into account this kind of wider context? Like, is our geopolitical implications more integrated into the EU's trade agenda? And we don't have a lot of time, so I'll ask you both to keep your answers short. Ambassador, would you like to start?
Well, I think that it was always, never trade agreement is made somewhere in a vacuum. It was always there. Maybe now it's more explicit, and I think that this is a new reality which we have to face.
Malte.
We're clearly going through some turbulence, and I think there's going to be some lasting effect from the turbulence that we're going through now, but it doesn't change the fact that together those two markets are the strongest protection that we collectively have against different, more authoritarian systems that neither wants to see. And in order to stand up for what we believe is the kind of rules-based, market-based order, I think the only way forward is to make full use of that transatlantic partnership and all the wealth and prosperity and stability that we can generate together.
Thanks so much. Thank you so much for you both, and especially for bracing the Brussels traffic this morning. Thank you so much for this very interesting conversation. So we are going to welcome now, Antonia, my colleague Antonia Zimmerman, who will be moderating the next panel discussion entitled Trade Triangle Looking East, West and Beyond. Thank you so much.
Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here at Politico's Competitive Europe Summit, and especially a pleasure to see such a full room here this morning. My name is Antonia Zimmerman. I'm a trade reporter at Politico, just like Camille. And I think our panel now will follow up quite nicely from the previous discussion. As we've just heard, transatlantic relations have been pushed to an inflection point. At the same time, we see the EU entertaining quite tense relations to China, antagonistic relations to Russia. And so obviously that's not only pushing Europe to rethink its relationship to those partners, but also to think a bit more strategically about how it can collaborate with other parts of the world, but also deepen existing ties. And so I think we've already seen the EU is a bit on a diversification push. Most recently, it concluded its long-awaited agreement with Indonesia. And at the same time, I think it's also facing some very critical questions on, well, also how to rethink some of its long-held assumptions around economic and security policy, but also the relations it already entertains with long-standing partners. So before we begin to address these questions with my great panelists today, just a little reminder that we always love to chat at Politico, so feel free to join the conversation on the social media platform of your choice, be that LinkedIn, Blue Sky, or whatever else you like to use. And now, without any further ado, please join me in welcoming our distinguished panelists. Kerry Mogan, who is the UK government's Trade Commissioner for Europe. Faruk Kaymakci, Turkey's ambassador to the EU. And Tony Hotin, who's the Executive Vice President for Western Europe at DP World. So before we really dive into our discussion on the EU's respective relationships with Turkey and the UK especially, in response to what we've just heard, I'd like to first turn to you, Kerry. So the UK was one of the first countries to conclude its trade deal with Washington. And at the time, it was quite telling because everyone in Brussels was really criticizing that deal. Yet a couple months later, we ended up with a very similar deal. So I'd like to hear from you. How did you perceive these last couple of months? Are we witnessing an erosion of the rules-based trade order quite quickly?
I think that's quite an early call to make when we're a couple of months in. I don't feel so. You know, I still hear from colleagues constantly back and forth about our conversations at the WTO, in other plurilateral settings, the other deals we're doing. I feel we're very much in the rules-based order. You know, there's always going to be evolution in some places, but I'm feeling an overall context that it's still very much there. I don't know about others, but...
But clearly it is under attack. I mean, we've seen just last week the EU actually also admitted that its trade deal with Trump was not going to be WTO compliant. So how do you assess, you know, that dynamic that's now being brought in?
I think we've seen before deals that have started smaller and got bigger over time. And I think it is really challenging when you start with a smaller basis that isn't fully comprehensive. But I do think it then gives you something to start talking about and working on. So I think for both the UK and the EU, getting those deals in the shape they did was a very important step. But I personally see it very much as the start of the conversation.
Okay. And Farouk, I mean, Turkey also has its own history with the US. The Turkish president last month paid his first visit to the White House in 6 years. And ahead of that visit, your country also ended some tariffs on US imports. I'm wondering, is this what we just have to deal with right now? Are we all bowing to Trump in one way or the other?
Thank you very much for the invitation, first of all. I don't think we are bowing, but, you know, now we have this very critical situation. When we look at the position of the EU and other countries, I think we have to handle the situation. So basically, of course, Turkey prefers rule-based system, but WTO is undermined too much. And of course, for our own interest, we have to make steps that will, you know, protect, I would say, our trade relations with the US. But, you know, this is, and also we have a target of $100 billion of trade volume to be reached. So we believe that this step could, you know, enlarge our cooperation with the US.
And so, in what sense do you think, because you just said the rules-based trade order is undermined too much, but obviously as we are all moving towards someone who wants to challenge the rules-based order, we're also contributing to undermining it to a certain extent, or would you disagree?
I mean, this is a different period. I would love to go strategic, but, you know, everyone seems to be transactional these days, and we have to deal, you know, with these conditions. You know, we are not saying that this is the right way, but, you know, I mean, every country has a weight and size and volume. So even the EU and the UK and others, and even like China and India, so they take, you know, I mean, similar steps. We hope that we can go back to rule-based, you know, multilateral system where, you know, things can be improved, but we have to adjust, basically.
And how did you perceive the last couple of months, or pretty much almost the last year? What kind of uncertainty did that bring for your company?
Well, I think in supply chain, I mean, maybe, thanks Antonia, and thanks for inviting us, but maybe I first just put DP World in perspective, because maybe not everybody knows what we do. DP World is a global logistics provider. We operate across 100 countries and have around 113,000 employees. In Europe, we have a strong and established presence, both in deep sea ports, particularly in Rotterdam, Antwerp, Marseille, and also in the UK, actually, and in Romania. And we operate across every level of the supply chain, so that includes those ports and also sea-based business with ferries and feeder services, and also in contract logistics with fulfillment services to a lot of end users across Europe and freight forwarding. Oh. Thank you. And I think whenever there is disruption, that tends to create opportunities in supply chain. And I think your comments right at the beginning about diversification are key, in that we all learned through the pandemic and recent crises that if you're overly reliant on one or more source and solution, that can create major challenges for business and the flow of goods. And I think we see now, even today, that most businesses are somehow scrambling to find alternative options and solutions. And I think what's really important for business in this environment is that you make long-term investments about where to invest, where to manufacture, how to source. You would like to have stability and predictability so that your risks are mitigated and managed in the process. So it's in many ways it's an exciting period because new options come up, new possibilities are created, and new solutions are thought up. But it's also challenging at the same time.
I'm glad you brought up diversification. I think, obviously, in this context, we're hearing a lot of talk in Brussels at the moment on, the EU needing new partners, but also needing to deepen its existing relationships. And I'm glad that we have, two representatives of countries here that the EU entertains strong ties with. Let me first turn to you, Phil. The EU's customs union with Turkey was concluded some 30 years ago. And there's always, been a lot of talk about the need to modernize it, or at least for the last 10 or so years. So that conversation has been dragging on. And I'd be interested to hear from you, what obstacles do you think stand in the way of actually getting to get started on the modernization?
Yeah. Actually, since we are discussing competitiveness of the EU, I think the major problem is the abuse of the unanimity clause. So unanimity clause, complicates, some of the processes. Of course, you can say that in trade, the European Commission has some competence, in some areas exclusive competence, but when it comes to general unanimity system, member states, might abuse it, and they do actually. And I think for the EU to become a real competitor, we need strong action, quick action, and this is, I think, linked to the unanimity. So, to answer your question, again, our problem is also, unfortunately, linked to unanimity for some political reasons, depending on the time, depending on the conditions. Is it one or two member states are blocking the mandate which is proposed by the European Commission to the Council to start modernization negotiations with Turkey. So since 1996, we have this customs union. This also means that Turkey is partially part of EU trade system because we are implementing EU's trade policy. We are subject to EU's trade agreements with third parties, and these customs unions needs to be updated for different reasons. Because it is old, 1996. We need to update it for carbon border adjustment mechanism. We need to update it for green transition, and we need to find a functioning, dispute settlement mechanism. But also we need to update for transport and logistics, because the current customs union is allowing goods to flow freely, but the truck drivers, they cannot move freely. So we have all these issues. So why it is blocked, despite the fact that the EU business, entire EU business, and entire Turkish business are in favor of urgent upgrading, but it's just political reasons. Again, one or two member states are abusing their veto rights because normally in the Council, we need qualified majority to give this mandate to the European Commission to start update negotiations with Turkey. But these one or two countries, they are saying that if you go ahead, we will block somewhere else, the EU, so you cannot take this decision. So this is a problematic issue. Of course, we have 210 billion euros of trade volume, which can easily be doubled if we can update the current customs union, which does not include agriculture fully, which does not include services, which does not include public procurement, energy, and to some extent logistics and transport. So if we can do this, I think we can easily double, and I think it will increase the weight and influence of Europe in general and the EU towards third parties, mainly China and US. You ask, why we cannot negotiate on the same footing? Because it's a question of weight. It's a question of means, but also it's a question of capability of taking quick decisions. What is the difference between public sector and private sector? In the public sector, it takes a long time to decide, and this is why public sector is quite slow. But when we look at the private sector, they can take quick decisions based on knowledge, based on data, and it makes all difference.
Thank you. So you've just said, the unanimity clause is one of the main obstacles. Now, what would first of all, what would your message? Could you be a bit more specific about the countries, and also, what would your main message be to those countries? And then, I think most recently, in its dealings with the US and the EU, there's been a lot of discussions also on Turkey importing Russian oil and gas. That's a main point of conversation that has come up in discussions around collaborating with Turkey more. So I'm interested, how do you justify these imports? And are you willing to reduce or halt them to improve your relations with trade partners?
I see 2-3 questions. How many minutes I have?
I'm giving you 3 minutes for
Okay.
2 to 3 questions.
On the issue of the customs union, normally the mandate was requested in 2016.
Yeah.
And March 2016, EU-Turkey summit decided that the update negotiations should start immediately. And this is why this mandate was asked. But in 2017, unfortunately, we had some political issues with Germany and the Netherlands. They were the ones, not having a lot of appetite those days. But today, all of the countries are convinced, even our neighbors, Greeks and Greek Cypriots, that this is, this is urgent and this should be done. But especially the Greek Cypriots are blocking it, and they are, abusing their veto right in other areas, not to allow the EU to move on. So this is a deadlock, basically. It's up to the EU. EU has to make its own choice. We are losing, but EU is losing tremendously. We are the 5th biggest trade partner of the EU. And Turkey, for us, the EU is also, an important trade partner. And when you look at this trade, it's a healthy trade. It's not like between US and EU or between China or Turkey. It's a very balanced, very healthy trade. So 210 billion euros, almost half exports, half imports. Second question, oil and gas. Unfortunately, Turkey has been marginalized and isolated by the EU. We have no high-level dialogue in the last 6 years. And suddenly, EU decides, to take some actions against Russia, which are legitimate. But the question is, a candidate country, Turkey, is there. A candidate country and also a customs union partner, Turkey, is there. You are not consulting Turkey. You are not engaging Turkey in any of your consultations. Because for the customs union, for example, we have a joint committee. So EU takes all those decisions, but EU is not offering anything. How can we replace, our oil imports from Russia? We have, some, I mean, serious level of oil imports, as well as gas imports. So we cannot replace them. We are also trying to diversify our imports, but this is not something which can happen, you know, in the short run. EU is compensating its own member states. EU can ask, you know, 1 or 2 member states which are not importing a lot, actually, in comparison to Turkey's imports. Then EU can help them to recompensate. But in our case, this is not easy because we are talking about large volumes. So, of course, if we can improve Turkey-EU relations, if we can have, for example, customs union, expand it and in full operation, I don't think that Turkey will be that much dependent on Russia or on Russian oil and gas. So this is what we need. But let me also underline that we are also investing a lot in renewables. So yes, we are importing, but also we are producing gas and oil, and we are also investing a lot in renewables. As of today, 60% of installed capacity is renewable in Turkey. So we have also our own targets. So net zero by 53. So this target also means that we have to reduce for ourselves the imports of gas and use of gas and oil.
Thank you. That was a bit more than 3 minutes, but
sorry
I'll let it pass this time.
Yes.
Quickly, I'd like to turn to you, Tony. I mean, I know you've also got operations in Turkey, so I'd be interested to hear how your industry perceives the EU trade environment and also the connectivity between the two partners.
Thanks, Anthony. You're right. We have one of the largest ports in Turkey, in Eviap, which is on the Sea of Marmara, and growing infrastructure there. Turkey is a very critical sourcing location for Europe, and also a strategic hub.
Also in Europe.
Also in Europe. And also, good point, also a strategic hub, a strategic staging post between East and West. Of course, with the current situation in the Red Sea, that sort of impacts somehow the relevance right at this minute. But when that abates, you know, Turkey will again take that position. I think what I would say is, as a generic comment, that frictionless trade barriers facilitate trade as a general rule. Same applies with the UK and other jurisdictions, and I think it benefits trade overall as much as we can do to reduce delays and challenges in those engagements across the borders. And Turkey is, I think, a very substantial and in a very strategic location, so I would support that.
Thank you. Kerry, I'd now like to turn to you. Obviously, the EU and the UK have their very own particular history and partnership. And in May, the two sides ushered in a new chapter in their relationship, moving away from the immediate post-Brexit era. What do you think defines this new chapter of relations?
History and partnership. What a way to describe the last 10 years. So, yes, I thought the summit was fantastic and a really good step. I think what we have is a basis, an agreed basis, to start talking about further ways to reduce the friction between the UK and the EU, and at a really important time. You know, in the same month, we in the UK agreed our deal with the US. We also agreed with India, and I think it showed our commitment to ensuring that we have access to a good range of diverse markets, as everyone should at the moment, picking up on some of the themes already in the conversation and the need to show options and frictionless trade. I think the other very good thing about the summit is that you have quite a forward-leaning conversation on working together on energy as well, and energy transition. And I think that's going to be pretty crucial for the UK and the EU moving forward. So very pleased to see that. The other thing I think was good coming out of the summit is the commitment to the kind of continued dialogue and annual process. So where we go from here as we build on kind of this basis. So yeah, I think it's a very good start.
And I mean, you've already talked about, reducing the frictions between the two sides. Now, quite concretely, what are some of the, things that you think you need from Brussels to make sure that we're actually entering a new phase of relations?
I think it's what we both need from each other. Look at the SPS agreement, for example. We hear it from traders on both sides of the water that they'd welcome a reduction in the frictions. So I think that's going to be pretty important, not least because I know that the EU and the UK, in the UK we have our small business strategy as well coming out, and I know we have similar thoughts in the EU, and there are so many small businesses in food and drink. So reducing the frictions for them as soon as possible, I think, will be really important. And I also think there's the fact that the trade between the UK and the EU is something that the volumes are so big anyway, and the trade is there across the whole of Europe and across the whole of the UK and nations and regions and part of Europe and the UK. So I think concretely having a dialogue and the start of a dialogue that takes that into account, again, that we have this rich trade, is a really, really important step. And also that I think the way that the summit also committed to ensuring we make the most of the big agreement that we do have, the unprecedented trade and cooperation agreement also, and that we're making sure we're making the most of the dialogues under there. Alongside that, there's also the relations that complement it with member states as well, which I think are pretty concrete coming. We have the EU summit, but then we have member state relations. Really good example, our work with UK and Germany, and then UK and France, and the conversations with France on working on our industrial strategies together and talking about, and that's complementary, a very mature recognition of the integration of supply chains and the need to grow our own industrial bases and work together on that. These are things that businesses want us to do. So I think it's, yes, about the summit, but also everything else it brings around it.
And yesterday at our summit, we had Italian Senator Mario Monti, the former commissioner, single out the role of the UK in the coalition of the willing. And basically what he was calling for was to say, we need a coalition of the willing that's not just focused on security. We need a coalition of the willing that's focused on financial stability, that's focused on trade. What do you, and he was particularly singling out the UK. What do you make of such an idea? And do you think that the UK would be on board to lead that charge as well?
To lead the charge on security, economy, everything in the world. I don't think it would be for us to say to other countries that we should lead the charge on all of that. I think what has been clear from our actions this year and the range of deals we've struck and the conversations we've had, that we do think there is space to convene and have these conversations that they need to do and be a strong part of that. As I said at the start, I think that's crucial to the rules-based trading system, to be making sure that we have platforms and dialogues where we're coming together to talk about the future of our industries, the future of financial services, and keeping the doors open, and so on. And I think part of the reason we've been able to do that is because we have quite a clear idea on our industrial strategy and what's important. And I think that works, therefore, hand in glove with our kind of foreign relations policy, because we're saying, here are the things that are important to us and in our national interest. Let's see how that matches with what's going on elsewhere in the world and make the right deals to do that. And I would say it seems to be the right approach for us so far, as an Italian colleague said. And we're seeing other countries adopt industrial strategies too to do that. So, yeah, where we have that complementary opportunity, we should definitely pursue it.
I know there's plenty more to discuss, but I think I'd also like to move to another issue. Because as we've already seen in this debate, obviously trade and security are increasingly interconnected, and as part of not only its response to the US, but also to threats coming from China, for example, the EU has been working really hard on advancing its economic security agenda. We have a greater toolbox of trade defense tools, but also growing attention being paid to foreign investment screening, for example. So, Tony, I'd first like to turn to you. I mean, how do you see efforts around foreign investment screening moving forward? And do you see a risk that the EU could discourage foreign investors with these efforts?
I think, you know, this is a quite tricky topic, but of course it is important that the European Union ensures that their strategic infrastructure is protected and the like. I think what's really important in this topic is that that is done on the basis of facts and looks at a wider, it leaves it as a balanced review of the opportunities. I think strategic investors like DP World, I mean, in the UK, for example, we've invested $6.5 billion in infrastructure. Europe, we're also significantly invested. We're long-standing strategic investment partners, and I think it's in the mutual interests of both Europe and countries like the UAE, which are doing these kinds of investments, to create an environment where that is evaluated on a fact base.
And Kerry, I think, I mean, greater geo-economic conversion between the UK and the EU is a topic that comes up every now and then, but wasn't necessarily part of, you know, the discussions in May. Do you think there is a need for more joint action on the topic? I think here in the EU, we mostly see the UK as moving a bit slower than the EU does. But yeah, what do you think? Is there an opportunity there to maybe join forces as well?
Sorry, on economic security.
Yes.
Vision. I think there's, yes, what we think in policy terms, but there's also the reality of business that we have to understand and know. And that is that most companies now are tech companies in one way or another and have to have some level of integration, some level of service dependency, other things. And so we have to be pragmatic and make sure we're listening to business and combining very much our economic security goals while creating an important open trading environment. So, you know, that's why we have dialogues, business dialogues with a range of countries around the world to understand what they're doing around economic security. Because I think the biggest challenge for business is that we, where we have supply chains that go across markets, that we're taking a similar as possible approach while listening to our national interests. So yes, closely working with the EU absolutely on economic security, but doing it from a lens of what's going to work for the business growth.
Do you think the EU might be moving a bit too fast in that area?
The world is moving quite fast in economic security, right? And we have to respond to that. Yeah, I don't think it would be for me to say if it's moving too fast or not. I think what I do know is that we have to, whatever we do together, we have to talk about that to make it work for both markets. Yeah.
And so how do you perceive these efforts from the EU side? Do you see a risk in, you know, making things too complicated for businesses, or would you rather say, you know, these efforts in terms of economic security from the EU side are justified?
I think they are justified. Diversification is important. Energy security is critically important. Connectivity is important. Of course, EU has to protect, itself from unfair competition from the third, partners. This is important. Also, this is valid for us because we are part of Turkey-EU Customs Union. Joint action is needed, but also in order to negotiate in the world platform, I think EU needs to have much more weight, because if you look at the world, we have China, we have US, we don't like it or not, but we have also somehow Russia. And then EU is trying to emerge as a bloc to negotiate. For this, we need much more weight and increased energy security, sustainable supply chains through connectivity. For example, we are talking about global gateway. We are talking about Black Sea strategy, new Mediterranean pact. These are important steps, but it is important for the EU to create a functioning system with the countries in question. For example, if we talk about connectivity, and if you put all of your eggs in the Black Sea connection and try to ignore territories of Turkey, where we invested $200 billion in the last 20 years, we have 5 seamless connections through roads and railways and the bridges. So it's possible to walk from China to London today. So we also made this possible. But this is important that, you know, these have to be well planned. And the EU should not be too selfish and should not only focus on its own member states, but it has to take into account regional partners, especially candidate countries like Turkey and customs union partners.
I think that's a nice note to wrap up this panel. Thank you very, very much for joining us today and for your great insights. I think what we've seen is, you know, we might be in an era of great geoeconomic change and disruption, but that can also create opportunities if we lay the right foundations for cooperation with other partners. And I would ask the audience to please remain seated. And I'd like to invite on stage Constance de Valk and Josefa Knippers from Politico's Research and Analysis Division, who will be presenting a report exactly on defending Europe's economy, highlighting implementation gaps and strategic tools. Thanks again. Thank you.
Welcome. Thank you very much for joining as we talk about the EU's autonomous trade defense instruments. This is Constanze, one of our policy analysts. I'm Josefa, the research economist, and we are part of Politico's Research and Analysis Division, which publishes in-depth, data-driven analysis on pressing policy issues. So we decided to look into the EU's autonomous trade defense instruments. So we decided to look into the EU's autonomous trade defense instruments as in time where geopolitical tensions flare up. These instruments have become crucial for the EU to adapt to these developments and to counter the attempt of third countries to weaponize its globally integrated economic flows. So the EU has introduced 4 autonomous tools recently, and we will present them to you in the following slides. And they are autonomous because they apply the same rule to all trade partners, and they can be grouped into defensive and retaliatory tools. And the defensive one aim to detect and prevent foreign interference in investments done in Europe, and the retaliatory ones aim to respond to external actions done by third countries that put the EU at a disadvantage. And you can see that this distinction can also be seen in practice, as the defensive tools have seen a high number of notification and decisions, whereas the retaliatory ones have seen close to none. So the foreign direct investment screening is a defensive tool, and it was designed to protect the EU from external risk threatening its security. And as you can see, the vast majority of formally screened investment cases are authorized without any conditions, as shown in dark blue on the graph. And a smaller share are authorized with condition and remedies, as shown in light blue in the graph. And only a minimal share of 1% get blocked, as shown in dark green, highlighting the EU's current broader openness to foreign investments under the current regulation. And as of today, member countries are required and are not required to have a screening mechanism in place, but at the same time are responsible for doing the screening, which has led to an uneven and fragmented enforcement, and which the ongoing revision of the regulation aims to address by seeking to introduce a mandatory screening mechanism for all member countries, which, however, needs to be carefully balanced against the need to avoid deterring legitimate investors.
The other defensive instrument is the foreign subsidy regulation. So the EU has always had an approach of trying to curb the use of state aid, which is not like our Chinese and US counterparts that have a much more expansive use of subsidization for their companies. And so this foreign subsidy regulation tried to bridge the gap that was left in the WTO regulations that only target goods. And we clearly see that there was a gap, because in the use of that instrument, we have seen since its implementation around 179 mergers and acquisition filings, 200 public procurement procedures, and a number of ex officio cases. But what is really interesting is that despite China not being leading in those procedures, it is definitely leading in the in-depth investigations that the Commission has chosen to lead. So as you can see on the graph, there's 5 out of 6 in-depth investigations are linked to China, with the 6th one being the United Arab Emirates, the EPFE case. The next instrument that is also linked to procurement is a retaliatory one, which is the International Procurement Instrument. That one tries to re-level the playing field, as other partners are much more closed in their approach to public procurement, and the EU wanted to try and force reciprocity and openness of the markets. However, since its implementation, we've only seen one ex officio case from the Commission on the China's medical devices market, which has only been recently concluded. And you can still see that the top procurement spenders on the graph there, China and the US, have a domestic preference clause, where the EU currently doesn't have one. That might still change in the very near future. And so that will also signal that maybe this instrument doesn't work as well as it should to induce reciprocity.
The anti-coercion instrument is a retaliatory tool and was mainly designed to deter, but if necessary also to counter economic coercion from third countries. And the instrument has never been used, but examining the EU's most important trade relation, it reveals clear pressure points where it could become relevant in the future. So the two graphs show the corruption index of the most important trade partners of the EU, serving as a trustworthiness score, plotted against their share in EU's exports and imports. And you can see that the graph on the left shows that the United States dominates the EU exports, revealing the vulnerability of Europe's industries to trade tensions. And the graph on the right shows that China dominates the EU's imports despite a low trustworthiness score, highlighting the need for a credible instrument to deter coercion. However, the capability of the instrument to deter depends on a large extent to a decisive and reliable execution, which, however, has been questioned lately, as despite repeated calls in response to trade tensions, the instrument has never been activated, risking to leave the instrument rather symbolic and therefore meaningless.
So what the analysis of these 4 instruments shows is that despite having this extensive toolbox, the EU's approach remains quite fragmented and mostly reactive. The EU's trade posture has been shifting in the last decade. We've seen it not in the external rulebook, but also in the internal rulebook, with the new state aid framework and the new public procurement procedures, as I mentioned. And so those show us that the EU is becoming more protectionist, even if it doesn't say it quite yet. What the EU needs next is to address its short-termist thinking and get a good dose of realism in there as well. 10 years ago, China adopted its industrial strategy for 2025 and told us exactly where it was headed. Despite this, the EU woke up too late and now realized that it had quite severe economic dependencies and that it needed to address those. A similar thing happened with Russia and the EU's energy policy that we are now still scrambling to untie. And looking at our dependencies with the US, a similar thing could happen, especially in terms of digital services. And as we've seen in the graph, the pressure points are quite are quite present. What the EU can do is strengthen its cross-sectoral vision and really use all of the tools that are in its toolbox more broadly. We specifically dove into trade instruments for economic security, but the EU does have other tools that can fight social or environmental dumping as well, and those can be leveraged for the economic security goal. I'm thinking of the CBAM and forced labor ban. Those two could really enhance the EU's goals of economic security. In that strategic thinking as well, and in our analysis, we found that the Commission's use of its ex officio procedures, so the own initiative procedures, are quite a very efficient tool, as they can really target issues where they are the most necessary, as the Commission has a much broader overview of things. And so that, because the ex officio procedure exists throughout all of the mechanisms, it should be used more consistently. Ultimately, the EU does have a strong arsenal, but the core of the issue is really the deterrence paradox, as my colleague said. And it's that if we hesitate to use that arsenal, we will no longer be seen as a credible threat. In any case, here is the QR code for the rest of our analysis. Thank you for your attention, and we're happy to discuss some questions and discussions at the networking break that's happening right now in the main networking area.
We are united in diversity. We are very heterogeneous in our opinion.
We are doing this in our open democracies, discussing this all open and loud, and I'm not for that.
What is European Union? What is freedom? How we learn together.
question is, what is the EU doing? What is our plan?
are united in diversity. We are very heterogeneous in our opinion.
We are doing this in our open democracies. Discussing is all open and loud, and I'm not for that.
What is European Union? What is freedom? How we learn together.
The obvious question is, what is the EU doing? What is our plan?
Hello, and welcome back to Politico's Competitive Europe Summit. I'm Gregorio Sorgi, and I cover the EU budget, or the MFF, for Politico. And as most of you will know, the negotiations between national capitals on the budget have started, and they're well underway. And the big idea in the Commission's proposal from last July is to steer funding away from traditional sectors such as cohesion and agriculture, and spend more money towards innovation, defense, and big industrial projects. And the two big questions that we'll be talking about in this panel is whether this approach will boost growth and make Europe more competitive in the years to come, and turning to the negotiations, whether the Commission's drive for modernization and reform will survive the negotiations between national capitals. And you can all join the conversation and follow us on the social media channel of your choice. But now let's get to the discussion, and I'm delighted to welcome our panelists, Zsolt Darvas, Senior Fellow at Bruegel, Jan Straski, Senior Economist at the OECD, and joining us online we have Jan Šiško, the Secretary of State at the Ministry of Development Funds and Regional Policy in Poland, who's joining us online from Poland. But I'd like to start with Jan Straski, because one of the more controversial ideas in the Commission's budget is this idea of linking payments to economic reforms. This is something that was used in the Recovery Fund after the COVID pandemic, and now the Commission wants to replicate it for the budget. Do you think that this approach can also work for something like the EU budget?
Okay, so first of all, thank you for having me here. It's a pleasure and a privilege. And on the question, I think it is possible. It's important to draw lessons from the NGEU, so from the Recovery and Resilience Facility, the national plans, and the whole progress with this tool, and then apply them going forward to the idea of the national competitiveness plans, or what it's called in the Commission's proposal. There are some points, pressure points, where we have to be careful to make sure that the regional bodies remain involved in formulating the cohesion policy, for example, contributing. But in general, it's just down to the application of the subsidiarity principle. So they should be involved as much as needed. The countries should be involved as much as it's, again, efficient. And there is, in principle, no problem with this working.
And I'd like to join Jan Šiško in this debate, because Poland is the top beneficiary of EU funding, and traditionally Poland has been skeptical towards this idea of replicating the RRF blueprint for the next budget. What do you fear might not work in this model? And specifically, what do you think could be changed or fixed in the negotiations? Jan, over to you.
Thanks, Gregorio, for having me. It's a pleasure to speak at the event and take part in the panel. Greetings from Warsaw. I must first say that we are in the process of accepting the official position of the Polish government on the budget in the next coming weeks. So what I'm saying here is still unofficial in the formal terms, in terms of how to treat this voice from Warsaw. This being said, we are very eager to take lessons from the RRF. We are very eager to take the positive lessons and also to learn from the things that have not been as efficient as they could have been in that process. And our experience is that, yes, reforms and investments, or linking reforms and investment, the performance-based approach, can be good and can work well when the reforms are sectoral and investments tied to them are also linked to the sector that the reforms are pursued in. However, we also know that too much centralization can lead to the lack of inefficiencies. Our very unique position, or my very unique position, is that I oversee the spending in the RRF and the negotiations in the Polish Recovery and Resilience Plan, as well as some programs from the cohesion policy. And as the cohesion policy is much more decentralized in Poland than the RRF process is, we also see that in many ways it's more efficient, the investments go faster, and they're very well located and well placed, which is reflected in macroeconomic indicators. And as to what the goals are of the new budget, of the new MFF, in our view, in Warsaw, there are two goals that we need to pursue, and two goals that we need to have pursued by the new MFF. One is, of course, a Europe that's more competitive externally, that is, versus the United States and versus China. This is all the talk about investment in high tech, in specific sectors that we see a competitive advantage in Europe or in Poland being built. But the other equally important goal is socio-political, and that is linked to creating an equal sense of ownership of the MFF in what's perceived as the old Europe and what is also perceived as the new member states. This is super important for this ownership and for those benefits from the budget to be seen as proportionate geographically to all member states. And I think, although we appreciate the effort that the European Commission has made with presenting this proposal, we're not yet there, and there's some discussion that needs to be done in that respect.
And a quick follow-up, looking ahead at these discussions, but the European Parliament shares many of the concerns and the points that you've been raising. Do you think that politically the European Parliament could be an ally for the countries such as yours that are a bit more critical than the others towards these national and regional partnership plans? Do you see this dynamic playing out?
Yes, I'm aware of some skeptical approach of many political groups in the European Parliament towards this proposal. It is natural that there are different conversations being had. I can imagine the European Parliament wanting to stress its position and wanting to hear some definitions and explanations from the European Commission, similarly to what we want to hear. The biggest question on the table is how do we define competitiveness? Because although the spending or the investment needs or investment goals for the cohesion policy or what is to come after the cohesion policy have been very precisely declared and very precisely stressed in the proposal, the goals of competitiveness are somewhat vague. And we would like to have some degree of clarity what we are signing up for in the next MFF.
And Zsolt, I'll turn to you. You've been covering the budget for a long time, and you've been following many budget negotiations. So I'll ask you to take out your crystal ball and think about what's to come. Do you think that the Commission's reformist approach, especially when it comes to the national and regional partnership plans, so cohesion and agriculture, will survive, given that we have many countries in Council that are critical, the European Parliament is also critical? What do you think they will obtain in these negotiations?
So if you look at the history of EU budget negotiations, then the Commission always made a proposal 2 years ahead of a final agreement, and these proposals were geared towards different directions, but typically there was no fundamental change in the big picture, but there were many changes in the details, including watering down of of some of the ambitious proposals of the Commission, and also, more often than not, also reducing the overall heading and the overall ceiling for the MFF. Now, particularly for these partnership plans, the crucial issue is in the details, because also we can look a little bit back, for example. So we had the RRF in 2021, then 2 years later in 2023, we had a performance framework for the common agriculture policy, in which the initial proposal of the Commission was somewhat ambitious, but the member states completely watered it down, and the current performance framework for agriculture policy basically does nothing. I mean, the first assessment will be in 2027, by when all the money will be actually paid out. And here I also see a risk that even though this performance orientation might remain in name, but in subsequent negotiations, it can be basically watered down to just a paper tiger. Let me tell you an example. For example, already in the current proposal of the Commission, there's a so-called expenditure tracking and performance regulation, which is supplementing the main proposal. And it lists more than 500 intervention fields for the EU, which is good, and also lists the various indicators which would be used for measuring performance. Now, for agricultural intervention fields, there are some very sensible indicators. For example, the amount of CO2 emissions avoided. I mean, this is absolutely crucial. Agriculture is a major emitter. We must reduce its emissions. So if that type of indicator will prevail, then we should be happy. But there's also an indicator like the number of young farmers subsidized. Now, yes, it might be good to involve young farmers in agriculture, but if we subsidize them, we don't know what they achieve. So if the final outcome will be more such indicators which, how much money is paid out, how many farmers are subsidized, then it would mean that there will be actually no performance focus at all, or the performance focus will be severely limited in these new partnership plans.
And I'd like to hear Jean Srasky on this issue. What kind of conditionality do you think should be part of these national and regional partnership plans? Because there are some countries saying that it should be proportional, which essentially means that you should not link these payments to grand reforms like pensions reforms or labor market reforms, but from the point of view of the of a macroeconomist who looks at the economy as a whole, do you think that having this kind of conditionality could actually improve the competitiveness of a country and, convince the country to carry out these big structural reforms?
Well, I actually agree that it's not an easy question, the conditionality for something like cohesion policy, because there's the involvement of regional bodies, and this macroeconomic conditionality may not be really appropriate for this purpose, so this is well taken. Still, I think we have to try, so there are many big reforms that have to be done, and if they can be connected with such national plans, then I think that's a good idea. But I think we just need to look what worked in the RRF. We should try more to design output-based indicators, so go a bit beyond the milestones and targets that we have in the RRF, where it's possible. Because when you look at the national plans that were submitted under the NGEU, for some countries had plans that had output-based indicators to some extent, and some countries didn't. So more can be done, and we should definitely try to do that. And just the last point on the common agricultural policy, I think we really need to rationalize it and somehow free money out of it. So a bit is in the proposal of the Commission, but I think more could be done. Ex ante and ex post assessments of effectiveness. We need more data collection, as Scholt already mentioned, on many things. Where the money actually go? Do they support farms, the poorest farmers, or farms that suffer most from variability of income, and so on? There are huge data gaps that can be filled. We need to simplify the common agricultural policy, both for the recipients and the administrators. And there might be other measures, like including or introducing national co-financing to Pillar 1. I mean, it already exists in Pillar 2. It exists in cohesion policy. It seems to me pretty clear that this could be considered also for Pillar 1 of the CAP.
Yeah, and since this is the Competitive Europe Summit, let me turn to the competitiveness in the new budget, because there will be a European Competitiveness Fund, which massively increases the EU's financing towards defense, industrial project, biotechnology, and it's one of the biggest novelties in the European Commission's proposal. But Jan Sisko, there are some concerns that the Competitiveness Fund could potentially benefit the bigger firms in the bigger member states who are best equipped and more modern. And there is a push from some countries in the negotiations to have more geographic distribution as part of the new rules and have a better access for SMEs as opposed to big firms in this new fund. Do you share the concerns that this might be a problem, and how, from the Polish government's point of view, what do you think is the best way to prevent this from happening?
Well, so there are two aspects to this answer. The first one lies at the center of what the European Union is and what the European way of growth is. And to our understanding, the European way of growth has always been distinguished in the world as growth that is just and that is fairly distributed across the entire Union. The whole sense and purpose of the European Union is economic cooperation that benefits all. And as far as Poland very much shares the view that Europe needs to work on its external competitiveness, that we need to do this by investing in the most promising sectors and in technologies across the continent. We also cannot agree for any fund that would practically limit the beneficiaries of that fund to the most developed regions and the most developed companies in Europe. Sharing the concept and one of the biggest fundamentals that lie and build our union, so the just growth, we think that any competitiveness fund must also be accessible to the developing regions, to companies that today are small or at least medium, and in a perspective of 5-10 years can grow to being one of the largest enterprises on the continent, and then help to defend our economic interests and build our economic power in the world. That's absolutely fundamental, and something that we will try to explain and advocate for during those negotiations. The second thing relates to what one of the predecessors have said, which is super important for that reforms and investments, the performance-based approach. It cannot redefine the centralization of the budget. So as far as we see that linking reforms and investments can be beneficial, we believe that it is up to the European Commission to come up with a proposal that allows introducing reforms and investments in a way that is also implementable by the European regions. And this is, of course, difficult, as there are different administrative models across the European Union. For example, the German lands have a legislative power, the Polish voivodeships do not. Yeah. Poland shares 46% of our national shared managed envelope. We see the investment competence directly to the regions. 46% of all the cohesion policy money in this term that Poland has is in direct management of the regions. We have good macroeconomic effects. It's a system that works. We don't want to change it. But we are open to introducing reforms and investments if the European Commission comes up with a way that helps to incorporate it without predefining the centralization of managing the EU funds on the national.
On the competitiveness fund, a very quick follow-up. So you think that involvement of the SMEs is the way to achieve more geographic distribution as opposed to having strict rules on how the fund should be distributed across the union?
I think it's the only way, and it's the only way also to get social and political support of the proposal. Let me remind you, Draghi's reports, a fundamental report on where the European investment policy should go. In my country, in Poland, and many countries in the region, what the public opinion heard about the report, and the only thing that actually broke through the news, was the fact that when you look at the consultees of that report, we see companies and stakeholders that are focused only in a few member states, most developed member states, that are not from this part of Europe.
Yeah.
This is what I'm talking about, that we need to create a sense and a feeling of ownership of the biggest European projects across all member states. This is the only way to grow our union stronger. And yes, in that respect, investing in SMEs is the crucial factor to make competitiveness work.
Jan Straski, do you agree with this? Because what the Northern European countries, or what Germany would say, if I can interpret their feeling on this, is that the ECF is a market-driven instrument and it should reward excellence. So, you know, attaching too many strings to it would actually create more harm than good. Do you agree with this, or how do you feel about this question?
So I actually share Jan's sentiment very much. I mean, we have to design the new budget and the ECF in a way that takes everybody along. I mean, otherwise it's not going to work. And you know the reaction to the Draghi report from the new EU countries was a bit held back because they felt, some of them, that it was not really addressing their problems. But I think there is a room for very meritocratic tools in the budget. We have the Horizon program that rewards academic excellence, and it helps to diffuse innovation to the new countries, this work. We have other tools that can be used, the important projects of common European interest that try to do something similar, so bring kind of more developed countries together with less developed countries. It's something that we have in the Commission's proposal, and it's a good thing. Then there will have to be other ways, because the sentiment that has been expressed, I share. It has to be a budget that works for the whole Union, for all the countries.
Yeah, and now I'd like to go to the last part of the proposal, which are the own resources, which for the non-budget experts in the room are essentially new proposed EU-wide taxes that will be used to finance the budget and to pay back the post-COVID debt that was issued. And the Commission proposed new levies on tobacco and e-cigarettes, electronic waste that's not recycled, corporate revenues, among other things. And Zsolt, I know that you've been not too positive on the Commission's proposals for the own resources when they were put forward in July. Why do you think they should have had a different approach, and what's not to like with the new taxes that have been proposed?
Yeah. Let me start by clarifying that most of the EU budget revenues, wherever they come from, they are a burden on national budgets. For example, in 2021, in the current multi-annual financial framework, a non-recycled plastic waste levy has already been introduced. This is in place. But this is paid by national finance ministries to the EU budget. So we introduced it. It is called an own resource. It is counted, as a revenue. But the same revenue comes from, national member states. Now, whether the revenue comes from this plastic waste levy or the baseline distribution by gross national income, it only changes the cross-country distribution of the burden, but the burden remains the same on the national budgets. Having said that, even this plastic waste levy has a positive side effect because it incentivizes EU member states to increase the recycling rate of plastic, which is good for the environment. So it is in line with the with an EU policy goal. But on the financing side, I think we shouldn't mislead ourselves that these new own resources will somehow create a magic new revenue, which was coming from the moon. No, most of these revenues coming from national budgets, and there's a burden on national budget. Again, they can still have positive impacts. For example, this electronic waste proposal by the Commission, it might incentivize member states to increase their collection of this electronic waste, which is good. Mobile phones will not, throw away in the forest and poisoning the forest, but it would be collected. So it has a good positive side effect. But after all, the money would be paid by national budgets. So I think we shouldn't fool ourselves that it creates a new money. And there's also one particular proposal which I think is particularly worrisome. The Commission proposed a corporate levy, which should be based on turnover, and moreover, it would be lump sum amounts. So first of all, turnover levies are very distortionary, because, for example, in the banking industry, about 20% of the turnover is profit. In the retail sector, only 2% of the turnover is profit. So if you have a turnover tax, it's a much, much bigger burden on retail and some other sectors than on banking and some other sectors. So it has a major adverse impact across different sectors. Also, a turnover tax taxes each stages of the production. So one input which goes to another intermediate product, then that also tax which goes to another intermediate product, that's also tax which goes to the final product. So each stage of the production is taxed. So it could be a kind of cascading of the tax burden, which is very disadvantageous. And finally, the fact that it's a lump sum amounts, it also means that it would be a smaller burden on big companies than on mid-sized companies. So I think this turnover tax should be clearly abolished. Now, other proposals might stay, but again, we shouldn't fool ourselves that it creates new money. No, it doesn't create new money. It would just reallocate the burden across EU countries.
Do you share his concerns on the corporate tax? And more broadly, do you think that there was a potential to propose taxes that created new revenues that weren't already being collected by national administrations, and these ideas haven't been included in the own resources proposal?
Okay, so I agree completely on what Scholz said about the corporate levy. On the own resources, more generally, I think it's a bit of a misnomer, because own resources are either taken from revenues, existing revenues of the national states, or they are potential revenue of the national states. So there is really no own resource as such to my mind, and in a way. Okay, on the issue of the plastic levy, plastic waste levy, and the e-waste levy, these are good things. But two observations. One is that as they take out as they internalize the externality, so as people reduce the bad behavior, they also reduce the revenue of the budget, right? So in a way, if this revenue works as it should, it brings the revenue to zero. And the second observation is that the countries may not be very happy to deviate very far from the distribution of contributions that they see in the GNI contribution. So what Scholz was saying, that it changes the distribution. But the countries may still observe what the distribution is and try to bring it back to what they observe and what they're happy with. So my suggestion would be more to go for like obvious things, the customs duties, really give the countries that collect them only a small percentage for the collection costs and the rest passing to the budget. But otherwise, I think it's, in a way, a red herring to spend too much time on the discussion of own resources, and we should focus more on reprioritizing the spending of the budget.
Jan, Stisko, it seems that there is, not only on this panel, a lot of pessimism against the own resources, and there have been a lot have been put on the table, but there doesn't seem to be one that has, unanimous or even close to unanimous support among member states. So do you see any of the own resources being actually approved at the end of the negotiations? And what happens if that's not the case? Should countries simply pay more in terms of GNI contributions? Should the debt be rolled over? What do you think should happen then?
Yeah, unfortunately, I'm sharing a lot of pessimism that has been expressed in the last couple of minutes on this panel. The European Commission is facing a close to impossible task to find a common solution of all the member states. Some solutions that seem attractive or at least possible for my member state might not seem so for others. So I would especially like to stress out the point that if we can find new own resources anywhere, they have to be found in the potential sources of funding. So places that are not, or solutions that are not in place yet. And here there has been a talk over the last months, I would say, about a European ESTA solution. So a tax or de facto payment for every non-European citizen who is entering Europe on holidays or whatnot. A similar payment that every European needs to pay when they travel to the United States. I think, if I'm not mistaken, this is around $30 now in the States, a one-off. It's not a payment that exists in any member states right now in the European Union, so that could be a potential avenue of conversation, trying to find a solution over there that we would be very much open to pursue. We're also open to any discussions regarding managing loans and extending the loans that we all take as the European Commission. However, I'm not delusional. I also know what the Constitutional Tribunal in Germany has said. I also know what the position of the frugals is over here. But regardless, seeing the challenges, economic challenges, and also security challenges that we are facing as Europe, perhaps it is also time to acknowledge that by doing more of the same, we're not going to change very much in terms of European competitiveness. So perhaps we do indeed need to need to do a bit more and spend a bit more.
Yeah, and that's a good note to end our panel. I'm sure we'll be talking about these topics more and more over the long negotiations that will end in 2027. So there's a lot of time left, but I'd like to thank my speakers, and please remain seated, and I will invite on stage Joanna Roberts, who will be sitting down with Marcel Le Chanteur from our partner Lilly. Over to you.
Good morning and welcome to Politico's Competitive Europe Summit. My name is Joanna Roberts and I'm the policy editor here at Politico. And I'd like to welcome Marcel Le Chanteur, President of France, Benelux and EU Affairs at Lilly. Thank you for being with us today.
Great to be with you, Joanna.
Now, I mean, the pharma industry in general is facing a very interesting time at the moment. Donald Trump is threatening to impose the first tariffs on medicines since World Trade Organization agreement over 30 years ago. He's also threatening to erode farmers' US profits by lowering drug prices to match countries in Europe. And here in Europe, the EU is reforming farmers' market monopoly rights, likely to limit them. But some in the industry are hopeful that the forthcoming Biotech Act will be more favorable towards the sector. And that's not to mention the general sort of competitiveness themes and conversations we've been having. So Marcel, I do want to get into talking about how the health sector fits in with some of the wider themes we've been discussing at the conference, such as strategic autonomy, growth, obviously, and competitiveness. But first, I just think I'd like to dig into the US environment a little bit, because it does impact quite a lot on Europe. There's been news overnight that President Trump has paused his tariff threats on the pharma industry because he wants to do more deals with companies like the one he struck with Pfizer, which is where Pfizer committed to lowering their prices in the US and selling drugs through the Trump RX platform. Is Lilly planning to strike a similar deal?
Well, I mean, first, it's great to be with you. You understand that we will discuss with every administration, not only the US administration, every administration in the world first, before making any declaration. But I think what's very clear is that trade is part of competitiveness, okay? And our goal as an industry in general, our goal in Lilly is to speed the access to our drug to patients. So whatever it's trade, whatever it's other barrier, we will work hard at making sure that our medicine are going to the citizens of the world. That's really the first element. The second part, I think, in your question, you mentioned two important words, autonomy and competitiveness. And I think the tariff and the overall environment is part of competitiveness. So the question for me on the table is, how do we react, obviously, for us as a company, to the US administration, but every company will fix their price as they wish and should be committed to deal with the administration, obviously. For us, the question is also in Europe, how do we make sure we keep competitiveness? I hope we will discuss that. But if it's not with trade, it has to be with something else.
So can you give us a flavor of your thinking about how you're going to deal with the White House and particularly the drug pricing demands in the US?
Well, it's very clear. Everybody has heard the playbook of the US administration. It's about making sure that we are ensuring more resource. We have a global manufacturing footprint, which is very important in the US. We have announced a lot of new investment, but we have also a very strong platform outside of the US. So for us, our view of that is to make sure that we can deal correctly with the different administrations, including the US. We will do whatever it's possible to meet and get an agreement, obviously. That's the goal. But that's the same goal we would have with any administration in Europe. We meet the different stakeholders. We want to reach agreement. We don't discover drug to keep them in the fridge or in our R&D operations.
Sure. I suppose it is like dealing with any other administration, and then in a way it really isn't, right? It's, I wanted to ask a couple more specific questions before moving on to the broader thing. I know that when we're talking about the pressure on the pharmaceutical industry to bring US and EU prices more on a par, I guess that could go two ways. Is you lower the prices in the US or you raise them in the EU. I know that Lilly announced a price change to its weight loss drug Mounjaro in the UK, sort of after Trump had demanded sort of a more equal par. Are there any plans to raise the cost of Mounjaro or other drugs within Europe?
The cost of Mounjaro is aligned in Europe with a European price that is the same. So that's the answer. The question behind the question is how do we collectively make sure that we have enough competitiveness? And I think that's a very important question for me. The US administration we speak about the tariff right now, but overall the question is a question of competitiveness. It's not just tariff, okay? And the question you have about the price raises the question of value. So there are three very important elements. Are we having an environment that is basically valuing innovation? Is this environment competitive in terms of attractiveness? And do we make sure that at the end of the day, we can secure access to patients? Because that's the end goal, okay? everything is interrelated. If you have a system where innovation is not valued enough, and you refer to the differential of price, that's one way to look at it. Another way to look at it is to say in which condition you can access to those drugs. Then it means that your environment overall is not valuing innovation. These are not great conditions if you want to have a vibrant pharmaceutical sector. But it's not enough. You need other conditions, and maybe we'll discuss that later.
Mm-hmm. I think, well, sort of in terms of the other conditions, one of the other things that Trump's pushing for is for pharma companies to have more production facilities within the US. I know that Lilly's committed to spend $50 billion on 4 new production facilities in the US, some of which was announced before Trump came into office and some after. So just talk me through the decision-making, why the US, not Europe, has that US investment come at the expense of investment in Europe, and how would you sort of sum up the two environments for investment?
The driver force in our case, okay, I'm not going to speak about other companies. I think after we can discuss the condition for competitiveness, but the driving force for us is the pipeline. The pipeline and the new medication and what we have require for us to expand the manufacturing agenda. We are expanding that manufacturing agenda, obviously in the US, as you refer, but not only. We have state-of-the-art facility across Europe, and we have investment ongoing, okay? So the driving force is, first, can we deliver what we commit to deliver? Then the question of tariffs comes. In our case, because we have a global manufacturing, we believe we are in a good position to discuss with the different stakeholders. That's the net answer. Mm-hmm. But if we did not have the pipeline that we have, that would be a different situation for us.
Yeah. So if we just talk specifically about then the sort of wider regulatory environment within Europe, I know some of these new factories that had been developed in the US are to do with to produce APIs, so the active pharmaceutical ingredients to go into the supply chain, which is somewhere that Europe's been traditionally strong in manufacturing. What are the regulatory barriers or the regulatory differences that you face in Europe as opposed to US for these type of products?
Well, I mean, let me first reframe. We make decisions on manufacturing that are based on our need and capacity, okay? That's very important. The debate about API, it's an interesting debate. We also have API produced in Europe. We have API produced in the US. But I think the question is, do we have strong and resilient supply chain? That's our first mission, okay? And then come the rest. It doesn't start the other way around. You know, it takes us several years to build manufacturing site. It takes months to get regulatory approval. So we don't make those decisions on the short term or on a blink of an eye. There is a bigger agenda. Now, in terms of difference, whatever it's for manufacturing decision or just operations decision, it could be research, it could be partnership. While you think about the speed at clinical trials, let's start early in the chain. There are other regions in the world that are faster than us. In Europe, that's for sure. You look at regulatory decision. You can compare the math. We will not discuss the exact number here, but by any standard, the US regulatory decisions are going much faster. And then you look into the speed of access to patient. Then it's different. There are a lot of difference across the different countries in Europe, some of them going very fast, others going very slow. And then you look at IP, very critical also. Is it strong? Is it predictable? Is it competitive? So now you look at those 4 or 5 elements, and obviously the competitiveness is really driven by the sum of all of those elements. And we look at that when we make decisions. So I think the answer about competitiveness is not so much just to look at what's happening right now with tariffs and with those things, is to look at us and ask a fundamental question. What's our vision?
And what is our vision? Or what should our vision be?
Well, my personal view here is the following. If I compare how a company would operate, we align behind a vision, and we put the resource in people, capital, the plan, to align on that. And then eventually we will have policies and all what follows. I think in Europe right now, the question is, do we have a set of regulation policies that are in multiplicity, or are they aligned in coherency, in small number, behind that vision? If that vision is that we want to have strategic autonomy and competitiveness, well, then let's ask two questions. Strategic autonomy. I think health is part of it. Everybody thinks about defense, but defense is critical. Health is critical, food, data, and energy. With that, you can do a lot of things, correct? If you have an agenda that is geared at that, and that you want to be competitive, then your set of policies and regulation have to be simple, coherent, and aligned. In our sector, concretely, if you are making clear movement to have, I would say, stronger and compelling protection of innovation and IP, you're going to do better.
And in terms of health being part of this wider competitiveness conversation, obviously 5 years ago, health was very much at the center of European policy making on everyone's minds, and got a big boost in terms of both funding and attention at an EU level. We certainly feel that that's dropped off. What's your view of sort of the view of health as in part of this broader EU policy framework?
Yeah, I think health historically has been discussed within its own ecosystem, if I can say, with the classic stakeholder and all that. The current geopolitical agenda is putting us in a bigger type of framework when you have commitment, obviously, from authority, and like they should, to basically increase the defense budget, it has a mechanistic impact on the rest. Our view, my view, is that it needs to be part of the deal of strategic autonomy. It doesn't make, we will not have any autonomy if we are just having an autonomy on defense, because then you are weak on energy, or you're weak on health. So this is why I think you need to start with those 4 or 5 key pillars. And if you want autonomy, you need to secure autonomy around those different pillars. Health is a very important element. Let me just give you a quick one. We speak about the US, and yes, 15 years ago, Europe, 30 years ago, Europe was the pharmacy of the world. You look at our ranking today, absolutely, eyes are on the US. But I don't think they are only on the US. I don't know if you have seen the Global Index for Innovation 25. It's an interesting one. You look at the top 10 nations. China entered the top 10, and basically Germany is further down now. Okay? Now, so that tells you that they are basically putting more efforts on innovation, more efforts on patents, because they have a plan and a vision, and it's quite simple. So at the end of the day, I think it's not so much about the number of policy, it's not so much about looking at different things, but putting things together in a simple, pragmatic plan. It's about time to execute, you know? And it's this time to execute is critical right now in health, but in the pharma sector in general.
Yeah, and I think with the pharma sector, I mean, everyone has a stake in it, right? At the end of the day, it comes down to patients. What is at stake here if Europe doesn't get its act together, I guess, on competitiveness? Are we going to see medicines withdrawn from the market? What's the sort of worst thing that could happen?
Well, unfortunately, people get sick, and they will take drugs. So the question is, do you want to have some of them imagine, discovered, produced, and exported from here? Or do you want just the place to be a consumer place? I think at the end of the day, that's quite simple. My view is that we need to have both. We need the genius from all over the world to discover a new molecule that can basically push back disease for which we had no solution so far.
Okay, as you can see, our time is up. But thank you ever so much for joining me on stage. Please do remain seated. I'm going to invite on stage Catherine Carlson, who's going to be moderating our next discussion on private or public funding Europe's future. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Hi, and great to see you here at Politico's Competitive Europe Summit. My name's Catherine Carlson. I'm a financial regulation reporter here at Politico. So, funding Europe's future, that's no small task. The EU is currently scrambling to drum up extra capital to fund the many challenges it faces, whether that's climate change, technological shifts, or boosting the bloc's defense capabilities. The Draghi report estimates that the EU will need an additional 750 to 800 billion per year by 2030. And as we've just heard in the previous panel, public finances are tight, and any negotiations over how much is spent and on what look set to be incredibly contentious. The financing, in large part, needs to come from elsewhere. Enter the Commission's new plan, the Savings and Investments Union. It's a strategy to get everyday citizens who normally keep their money parked in bank accounts investing, generating a bulk of extra investment money in the EU. That will require a cultural shift, prodding people used to savings accounts and state pensions into becoming more familiar with the world of private investment, and a technical one, fixing up the EU's financial plumbing to make sure that investment money can flow effectively across the EU instead of being trapped in 27 fragmented markets. Now, the Commission has a long list of initiatives it will pursue for those goals, including reforms to private pensions, a new simple investment account for the everyday citizen. The ambition is there, but there's a long way to go, and there are still questions ahead. Will governments get on board with the initiatives and make the necessary compromises? Are these reforms enough to stimulate investment activity? And can the EU get savers to care enough to invest their own money? Well, we'll kick it off with a short interview, and then we'll open the discussion up to a wider panel. So first, let me give a very warm hand to welcome Gelsomina Vigliotti, Vice President at the European Investment Bank. Thank you so much for being here with us today. Now, let's talk about the sort of overall investment picture in the EU and the challenges that we're facing. What's the EIB doing in this area? And I mean, is the problem as bad as people say?
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Catherine, and good morning to everyone. I'm particularly glad to be here to talk about the role of the European Investment Bank Group with respect to the savings and investment strategy. I guess that you all know about the EIB. This is the financial arm of the European Union. It's a bank. The shareholders of the EIB are the 27 countries. We have 70 years of history, and we like to say that we are a bridge institution between the savings, the public and private savings, and the real economy. And coming to the Draghi report and the solution, the diagnosis of the problem is already clear. We know also what is the cure and how we have to leverage resources. And I think that one of the major contribution of the EIB group through the years, and especially now, is that to leverage public resources. We, rely very much also on the EU budget guarantee, and this allows us to, to leverage a lot of our resources and to serve countries, private sector, public sector, and in particular with the European Investment Fund, which is part of the group, and is a fund of funds where also the European Commission participates. It has been an extremely relevant institution to create and nurture financial ecosystem, in particular for venture capital throughout Europe. And we know that in Europe there is quite a diversified financial situation, and there are countries where capital markets are much more developed, countries where this is less developed, and we have strategies for all these countries. Where there are already capital markets which are very well developed, we can actually try to form those champions, funds champions, which can provide large tickets to European companies, and to avoid what we know that large and good startups that leave Europe when they are at time of grow or scale up, because there aren't sufficient resources in Europe. But also we have other countries where capital markets are not so much developed, and there the presence of an institution like, for instance, the European Investment Fund is relevant to create funds, local domestic funds, which can be created, that can develop and sustain the development of the financial market. So, it's quite a large palette of instruments through which we can serve the real economy.
Thank you. And so obviously you have the practical experience of being one of the institutions that's really investing on the ground in Europe. Is the diagnosis as bad as people say? I mean, do you really experience fragmentation across different countries and difficulty having capital flowing around the EU? Do we need to see changes here?
I mean, to say that this is not true, I don't think that we can say, because actually there are fragmentation, there are difficulties in creating maybe pan-European instruments. And actually what we try to do is actually also to create some pan-European instruments. Like, for instance, at the EIB, we were the first back in 2007 to issue green bonds. We issued the first green bonds. Actually, we are issuing in different currencies. And actually, we are also providing some standards in these green bonds so that, there could be some standards which can be shared among different operators on the market, so that this could be also instrument which can be channeled. We issued also digital bonds through the blockchain's procedure, and this is also a contribution to develop markets, to participate with the private sector to develop such type of instruments. This is just 2 examples, but also the EIB, I think, is the first institution to use venture debt. We like to call it patient capital. We know that there are many startups that cannot go to a bank providing a collateral for a loan. So we bet as EIB in the ability of this startup to develop. So we can provide them lending to a long maturities or without the maturities. I mean, betting on the success of this institution and waiting for it to make profits and to pay back our debt. So on this, I think that we developed also a strong partnership with the Commission, for instance, to the European Innovation Council. Also we are an advisor to the European Innovation Council, and providing, also support to the startup that they want to actually go to the market. And what we realize now is that we need to have instruments for all the stages of the life of a company, because the financial instruments which is necessary when you are at the early stage is different when you want to exit, when you want to merge or to buy a new company. So what we are doing, we are developing. We have already many of the instruments, but to be sure that we can address all the needs. And actually, we launched an initiative which is called TechU, because actually we want to accompany all the firms during their life cycles, and also to offer a service in terms of exchange of information. So on our web, we have information. We have a platform where there are information for getting resources. And we also received very well the message that we have to be fast, simple, and simple. Mm-hmm. And actually, I think that this is something that Europe needs, and so we are trying also to address these 3 components, to be very fast. I mean, not very fast, because in the end we manage public resources, so we have to be very careful on how we manage public resources. But actually, to avoid gold plating, to avoid long procedures, and also to have a very colloquial relationship with investors.
Yeah. Well, so while we're talking about fast and simple, there's one financial practice that the Commission really wants to boost the use of in the EU, which is securitization. For those of you who don't know, this is the repackaging and reselling of debt in different tranches. Some have presented this as a game changer to boosting investment in the EU. Others have said that reforming the practice to make it simpler, make the regulatory treatment easier, won't make that much of a difference to the overall financial picture. But the EIB is one of the institutions that's really engaged in securitization. So, I mean, is this, from your practical experience, is this a game changer?
Yes, absolutely. In particular, the European Investment Fund, I think that has been the only institution, European institution, continuing to to provide securitization products on the market through synthetic securitization or cash securitization. And actually, we helped to create the market of these for securitization in many of the Eastern European countries and to further contribute to the development of these in all the countries. Actually, we use guarantee and securitization. Actually, there is a difference in dealing with pure guarantee or through securitization. And what is very useful, and I think that the Commission is doing a great job in simplifying the due diligence so that it can be an instrument available to all. But since I see that the time is running, I forgot to mention a very, actually I said it implicitly, but I want to spell it clearly, is the initiative that there is already an important initiative in Europe, which is the European Tech Champion Initiative. This is also, a fund of funds. Why we started that initiative together with other European countries, putting together resources by the EIB and resources from other countries, because of the difficulty in having, companies that develop, grow, and remain in Europe. We realized that also we need funds, private capital fund or private equity funds, whichever is a good size. Good size in order to put relevant tickets of money into the companies where they invest. So we want to have in Europe a champions fund who can have a size of 1 billion so that they can provide large tickets. It was very successful so far. It was managed through the resources of member states and the bank and the European Investment Bank. What we want to do now is to attract private capital. To have this partnership of private and public resources. And also there, I think what is important, and we are working also with the Commission, to have some easier regulatory requirements, lighter legislation, which actually can incentivize the private investors, private sector, to invest in the economy. Actually, it's Europe. It's a wealth continent. We have a large amount of savings, but actually there aren't the right channels to channel savings from the private sector to the real economy. And we have ideas, we have a large number of startups, but we need them to grow. And actually, our role, together with the Commission and the Member State, is to contribute to this development.
Perfect. Thank you so much for your contributions.
Thank you to you.
You've laid out lots of the issues that we'll get into in the next panel. But for now, Gelsomina, thank you so much.
Thank you, Katrin. Thank you.
Okay, well, after that brief interlude, allow me to welcome our distinguished panel to the stage. We have Andrea Beltramello, head of the freshly renamed Savings and Investment Union Coordination Unit at the European Commission's DG FISMA. And we have Judith Arnal, senior fellow at the Centre for European Policy Studies. I got that right. Perfect. Okay, we've identified plenty of the issues in the interview that we've just had about what might be blocking and clogging up the investment channels in the EU. Judith, I'm going to come to you first. The issues that we're talking about, is the investment picture really as bad as people say in the EU?
I don't think it's as bad, and please allow me to break 4 myths very quickly. So first one, I think that we're all obsessed about the size of the MFF, about lack of fiscal space in our budgets, and we must realize that most of those investments will have to be funded by private sources. So we really need to focus our attention not on political battles about size of public budgets, but about how to channel those private funds and how to stimulate them. Second point, and second myth I want to break is that we are not able to keep our savings at home, and that 300 billion euros, according to the Letta report, of household savings leave the EU every year. Well, that's simply how a balance of payment works. So if we have a current account surplus, of course our savings will go abroad. So basically, we have to stop being obsessed about having current account surpluses, and then we will keep those savings. Third point is that the Savings and Investment Unions is simply an EU project. And I think that there is a lot of homework to be done at member state level, and I think that the Commission is launching the right recommendations, like with the Savings and Investments account. Also, there's a lot to do with pensions to promote Pillar 2, Pillar 3 pension systems, and I think that tax incentives have a clear role to play there. And last but not least, there are some people who think that banks are against the development of capital markets in the EU, and I think that's not the case. And I'm fully convinced that having a truly functioning banking union will help develop a capital markets union. Why is that the case? Basically, we have more assets under management in the EU than in the US. More than 30 trillion euros of assets under management in the EU compared to more than 20 trillion euros in the US. The problem in the EU is that our investment funds are fragmented, and that's basically because those are channeled via banks. If we achieve a banking union and we have European champions, then our investment funds will also grow, and we'll have stronger institutional investors.
Andrea, there's a lot in there that I'm sure you'll want to respond to. Maybe if there's anything you want to respond to there, and also maybe you could walk us through what are the main initiatives that the Commission is doing to try and fix this problem. You have the unenviable task of being the technicians trying to fix the EU's financial plumbing.
Well, it's hard for me to add to what Judith said because I basically agree with everything she said. What I can say is that, at least from the Commission side, we are trying indeed to address the challenges that Judith just presented so eloquently. Clearly, we have the savings in the EU. Europeans are among the best savers in the world. But the issue is that at the moment we have 10 trillion euros in deposits, and that's nothing bad with that because those deposits are actually used by banks to fund the economy already, and because people need deposits for the safety, the liquidity, and so on. But we could shift at least part of those deposits into capital markets. That will make a great contribution to filling that investment gap that Draghi has so well documented in his report. The issue is that, so we have the savings. We have actually also the business case for investing in Europe because we have a lot of good investment opportunities in Europe. A lot of innovative companies, startups, growing companies. So the business case is there, but we have an issue with the financial intermediation, which is not working. We have a problem of fragmentation. Our capital markets are too fragmented, too underdeveloped, too small. We have more than 300 trading venues, a lot of post-trading infrastructure, a lot of small investment funds, very fragmented. So we need to act on that. We need to improve the plumbing, as you put it, of our financial system and ensure that this conveyor belt between the savings and investment is working as efficiently as it's not doing at the moment. So we are doing that indeed through several work streams that we will we will put on the table by the end of this year. We already started the other day with our recommendation on savings and investment accounts, on financial literacy, so really to mobilize more investment from little investors. We have the pensions package coming in November, where we will at the same moment improve the opportunities for people to have better income in retirement, but also ensuring that pension funds can more easily deploy their firepower into the economy. And finally, by the end of this year, we will come with our package that will address all these inefficiencies that we still have in our capital markets and removing these barriers that create a lot of fragmentation.
It's nice that you raise the idea of efficiency and inefficiency, because I think one of the main complaints that we often hear is that investment's not flowing around the EU, also just because the regulatory landscape is so complicated. And obviously, there's this big push from the Commission to simplify lots of things at the moment, initially on green finance, but potentially for other finance areas later. Judith, why is FinReg so complex in the EU? And I mean, is this really the issue that industry and other actors might make it out to be?
I think that this is something that we should really work on. And first, I think that we should diagnose why our regulatory landscape is so complex. So I would list 5 main reasons. First one is that there are too many mandates to level 2 and level 3 levels. I mean, there's been an explosion. In the 90s, one could claim, I'm an expert in financial regulation. Nowadays, it's impossible. You can be an expert in a very specific subset of financial regulation due to...
We still try.
the amount of level 2, level 3 pieces. And the second point, this gets me to my second point. Why is this the case? Do we love regulation? Well, I think that this is very much linked to governance. So we have 27 member states with 27 national competent authorities. So the way to ensure a bit of coherence and the internal market and that the internal market works well is to have hyper-detailed legislation. And even with that, many times we still have national competent authorities doing different things. The third reason I would say is gold plating by member states. Member states love to gold plate. I think that the shift from directives to regulations has somehow helped improve this, because now there is no transposition in national parliaments, but even with regulations, now gold plating practices have moved to the Council. The fourth point, I think, is that we need to improve how we assess regulations. So the European Commission usually does impact assessments, but then when it goes to the co-legislators, a lot of amendments are introduced and there is no impact assessment of that. So we don't really know how that regulation is going to work. And then I think that there should also be ex post assessments on a regular basis, and this really doesn't happen. And finally, I think that our rules are very much focused on financial stability and consumer protection, with which I agree. But I think that it's also time to think about the possibility of introducing secondary objectives, like other authorities are doing in the UK. We could think about financial competitiveness, financial sector competitiveness, and this is not at odds with other primary objectives. I am convinced that they can be self-reinforcing.
Andrea, does simplification need to be a key part of boosting investment in the EU?
Absolutely. As you know, simplification is a very important priority for the EU and for the European Commission as well. And I think in the area we're discussing, we have a great opportunity for simplification with this reform package that the Commission is going to present by the end of the year on market integration and supervision. We have at least 4 areas in which we can work for more simplification, and they're all interrelated. So first of all, we have financial actors in the EU in all these sectors, in trading, in post-trading, in asset management. They are active across different member states. Basically, they act as groups, but they are not actually recognized as groups. So in practice, even if they have a pan-European footprint, they are treated as potentially 27 different entities, and that creates a lot of duplication, a lot of waste of resources for them, instead of concentrating on doing business. So that's one area in which we can do something to simplify already the operations of these large entities across the EU. The second area is gold plating. So we know that one of the main issues is that because we have many directives which are transposed into the national legal frameworks instead of applying directly, this gives an opportunity to create a lot of layers of additional rules. So we will aim as much as we can to move provisions in the EU financial rulebook from directives into regulations, or even converting directives fully into regulations. The third area is about passporting. So as you know, one key pillar of our single market in financial services is the possibility for a financial service operator to be authorized in one member state and passport its services across the EU. Unfortunately, in many situations, this remains a theoretical possibility on paper. We need to improve the way the passport works. And last but not least, supervision. We have still fragmented supervision in the EU that leads to a lot of duplications, costs, and inefficiencies. So we have to explore how we can also simplify through a more coherent and more uniform supervisory system.
Judith, do you think those initiatives will be enough, or do you think there's more work that we need in other areas?
So I do really appreciate the work of the Commission, but the problem is that there are more actors involved. So I have the feeling that the Commission knows very well what they understand as simplification, but I'm not so sure that this is commonly agreed by other actors, and I'm thinking about member states, I'm thinking about the European Parliament, I'm thinking about national parliaments, national competent authorities. So I think that there should be first an agreement about how we understand simplification, and it should come from the very top. I'm thinking, for instance, about statement at European Council level, and also a mandate coming from heads of state and government to limit the amount of mandates to level 3, and also a commitment for better impact assessments, also ex post assessments. The second point is that I need that there should be someone with a 360-degree view of what's happening in different files. And let me refer, for instance, to capital requirements, bank capital requirements, capital stack. I don't think that the industry is asking for lower capital requirements. I think that they are asking for more predictable and simpler capital requirements. Now, the different capital requirements stay with different institutions. So, for instance, some macroprudential buffers depend on national competent authorities, and sometimes they just come out of the blue, so there's no predictability. So I think that there's an effort that should be made in this regard. And last but not least, I think that in the medium term, we should absolutely go in the direction of pulling our governance systems together at the European level. I think that the single supervisory mechanism is a good example. Of course, it has now turned 11 years old, and I think that some aspects could be improved, but I think that this is the direction to go in the future.
Okay. For those who aren't maybe familiar with the ins and outs of financial regulatory architecture, the SSMs is referring to the fact that there's central supervision for the banking sector in the EU, but it doesn't really exist for the non-banking sector. Andrea, maybe you can touch a little bit more on the issue of supervision, because I think for a lot of people, this is an initiative talking about getting citizens investing. It's an initiative talking about having more of a culture in the EU. Where does a sort of obscure technical issue of who's supervising financial players that most of us don't interact with day to day, how does this really move the needle in terms of the overall picture?
Mm-hmm. No, it's a very good question, but it's important that we make this link, because ultimately we all pay for the fragmentation, the inefficiencies. So this is not an agenda for the financial sector. It's not like a gift to the financial sector. It's because if the financial sector in the EU works more efficiently, it means lower costs also for the final users of the financial sectors, the companies who are seeking finance through the financial sector, and the people who are investing, who are putting their saving into productive uses for themselves through the financial sector. So having a more efficient, less fragmented, less costly financial intermediation in the EU, it's really to the benefit of everybody. And that's where the supervision comes in, because, as I said, supervision can also be a barrier to more efficient financial intermediation in the EU because of all these duplications and all these inefficiencies. And therefore, if we have a more efficient way also to supervise the financial sector, this will be to the benefit of all. And there are many ways to achieve that objective. In some areas, we have already tools for ensuring more convergent supervisory outcomes across the EU. So we have already an authority, the European Securities and Markets Authority, that works with national competent authorities and has already some tools to ensure that the supervision is done in a convergent way. But these tools can bring you so far, And we believe there is merit in assessing moving some supervision also to the EU level, in particular for certain entities that have a very significant cross-border footprint in the EU.
And I think some of the important context here is that historically, this has been a very political issue, the issue of supervision of financial markets. It's very contentious. There's a bit of a political rift between EU countries, which has traditionally blocked progress in this area. Judith, are you optimistic that progress might actually come on a political level about central supervision?
Maybe in the medium term. I think in the short term, we could aim at other kinds of solutions. For instance, I think that the ESAs, basically the European Banking Authority, the ESMA you were referring to, and EIOPA for insurance and pensions, should be better resourced to carry out peer review processes and to test how national competent authorities behave. This should lead to a final outcome outlining who the bad outliers are, the national competent authorities who flag negatively in that impact assessment, but this should not stay at technical level. I'm convinced that this should go to ECOFIN and Eurogroup meetings. This should probably take the form of a statement where those national competent authorities are clearly flagged, and this should probably also feed into the European semester for those member states where national competent authorities are clear outliers. So to me, that could be a short-term solution, and I think that by aligning step by step the practices of national competent authorities, then the ground will be way riper in the medium term for a more long-term governance solution.
Yeah, it's interesting that you raise this point of linking the European semester to reforms, because, Andrea, I know we were talking about this earlier this week when the Commission was presenting its investment and savings accounts. Maybe you could talk a little bit about the interplay of how the Commission is actually making sure that these reforms are implemented when it's it's for the Commission to recommend, but it's for the Member States to implement these suggestions.
Yes, there are some areas of the Savings and Investment Union that can only be achieved through legislation because they are like let's say, initiative I was just describing. They're classic single market initiatives where you need a common rule book. But there are many things that can be done at the national level by the Member States themselves. So, for example, to get more people to invest into capital markets, this is something that can be done through national tools. There are also areas which are very difficult to tackle at the EU level, where reforms at the EU level are difficult. I think about pensions, I think about insolvency regimes, I think about taxation, and where member states can really take the lead and take ownership in doing the reforms that are needed for the Savings and Investment Union. So this doesn't mean that the Commission wants to completely abdicate from our responsibilities. We are there to support the Member States in these efforts, and we can give them recommendations. We can identify what are best practices that have worked in the EU, but also outside of the EU, as we did with the Savings and Investment Account just this week, provide these recommendations to the Member States and accompany them in implementing them. And of course, it's not about naming and shaming, but it's about, keeping things on track, and we can do that through different tools that we have already at EU level, European semester being a very established tool that is precisely aiming at ensuring that we do the reforms that are needed for our competitiveness and our economic growth. And Savings and Investment Union should definitely be integrated more closely into the European semester process.
So we've talked a lot about how to generate more investment capital and get more money flowing in the EU. But what about making the EU a more attractive investment destination worldwide, about actually attracting some capital to be invested in the EU? What do you think could be sort of game changers here?
Well, to me, this goes a bit beyond financial regulation, to be honest, because it refers very much to business climate. So here we're thinking about the full Draghi report where we should tackle EU competitiveness at different levels. But again, it's not only about the EU. One thing that I don't like, the only thing I would say that I don't like about the Draghi report is that many times it speaks about EU averages. But if we have a look at member states' situation in the different elements that we think explain competitiveness, we see that there is high heterogeneity. And what we see is also that usually the top performers are the same. And I'm sorry to say, I come from Spain, so I'm happy to say that it's Scandinavian countries, usually. So I think that national reforms have a very clear role to play in making the EU a more attractive and competitive place. So it's not only about shifting the whole responsibility to the European Commission and to European institutions. Member states have a role to play. So here, I mean, Andrea was mentioning that the Commission launched a recommendation for a savings and investment account. I understand that there will be also a recommendation for pension systems. So this is something that the European Commission can only recommend, but it's for member states to react. So here, I think that communication and journalists have a very important role to play in conveying to citizens that this is a way forward, and to also encourage citizens to ask at their member state level, sorry, where's my savings and investment account? There's a recommendation here to have a savings and investment account with tax incentives. Where is it? So I think that the same could be done with other areas of competitiveness, also to have a civil society who asks accountability at member state level.
Andrea, same question. Boosting the attractiveness of the EU as a destination for investment, and can the Commission go it alone, or does it need help?
Well, I think Judith said a very important thing. It's not only about financial regulation, of course, but it goes without saying. But I think it's an important point, because the Savings and Investment Union, as I said at the beginning of my intervention, it's about fixing this conveyor belt between the savings and the investment opportunities. In doing that, we can, actually, we must make sure that there is something in it for the people, for the savers, so they need to see a good return, they need to see the wealth creation opportunity in it, and this will create a virtuous circle where they will want to invest more of their money, and this will go more into the economic growth and jobs creation. But if we want also to attract capital from abroad, it means that the EU has to become an attractive business case. And this is not for the financial sector to create. There are many other policies that need to be put in place, and the Savings and Investment Union in that sense is a sort of enabler. So it's fixing the financial sector so that it channels the saving into the productive investment, but the investment opportunities have to be created through innovation policies, structural reforms, many other policies that can be fixed at the European level, but also very importantly at national level. So we really need to take a very holistic approach, and this is why, by the way, Savings and Investment Union is described as an enabler in the competitiveness compass of the Commission, which is, our compass towards a more competitive and growth-friendly EU.
And so we were hearing on the previous interview about the role that securitization could play in potentially generating more capital, having investment flowing more. I mean, just very briefly, each of you, what kind of a role do you think securitization could play in the wider picture of boosting investment? I mean, maybe I'll go to Andrea first, since you were just sort of touching on it.
I think securitization is a very useful tool. It can be really a great tool to free up banks' balance sheet and increase more funding for the economy. So that's why the Commission put such a big emphasis on it. That's why this is the first deliverable that we put on the table on the Savings and Investment Union agenda. And we hope that the Member States governments and the European Parliament will be as quick in following up on our proposal. But it's not the silver bullet. So it's a very useful tool, but it will not be the only one game changer in town. There are many other reforms that we need to do in order to be successful on the Savings and Investment Union.
And Judith?
I can echo Andrea's words. There's something I really don't understand, and it's why EU securitization markets are not working when, I mean, the financial crisis, the global financial crisis, it started in the US, so it was not, in the EU, it was not linked to EU securitizations. We must take into account that roughly 75% of funding for companies and households in the EU comes from banks. So basically freeing up banks' balance sheets so that they can grant more credit is very useful. So I think that we should welcome the proposal by the Commission of last summer with some very welcome improvements and fine-tuning in our EU regulatory framework for securitizations.
Okay, well, plenty of food for thought there. Thank you both so much for your contributions. Let's have a hand for our panelists. Just one sec. Please do stay in your seats for the moment. Next, I will be inviting Doug Busvine onto the stage for the editorial takeaways from this session. Thank you again.
Hello again, everyone. Well done for making it through the morning session. I found it fascinating. And thank you also to Catherine, to all of you here for watching Politico's Competitive Europe Summit here in Brussels. And those of you tuning in online, I'm Doug Busvine, the trade editor at Politico Europe. Well, the third stream of the Competitive Europe Summit is drawing to an end. And yeah, we've heard from panelists on how Europe is rethinking its relationship with the USA, building new commercial relationships with other parts of the world, and redirecting its investment power to new sectors to build in-house economic growth. Well, I've got a few takeaways, and I've got to admit I'm stealing shamelessly from our excellent live blog, which I would really recommend that you take a look at. So we kicked off this morning in Camille Geiss's session on trade, with Matthias Jørgensen from the Commission saying, yeah, we're going to get a Mercosur deal signed in time for Christmas. That's been a long time coming. We had a scoop on that earlier this week, so it's nice to hear confirmation from someone who should know. Matthias Jørgensen is the point person for trade talks with the US and Canada. Yeah, also quite a feisty panel with Malte Lohen from the AmCham, taking a swing at the Turnberry Agreement, saying it's not an ideal scenario. Yeah, some might put it more strongly than that. But he also saw the positives. No deal would have meant 30% US tariffs, plus getting on for 100 billion in EU trade retaliation. And that would have spelled a spiral of escalation that really nobody wanted. Coming back to Matthias Jørgensen, I think there was concern expressed there about Donald Trump's attitude towards steel, widening the range of products that are subject to steel duties. That's something that the EU is looking at pretty closely, as we're also on the brink of putting in our own restrictions and new tariffs there. Yeah, just skimming through. Going to Antonia Zimmermann's panel there, we had some interesting views from the near abroad. So the Turkish ambassador, Faruk Kaymakçı, expressed some frustration that the customs union with the EU is over 30 years old, or 30 years or so old. Time for an overhaul, but it's just not going anywhere. And also, some frustration expressed that that the EU is not really involving Turkey, a NATO member, remember, in its discussions around energy, what to do about Russia. So that's quite important, and I think worth noting. From Kerry Morgan, the UK's trade lead, yeah, she's welcomed the new chapter since that summit in May where they kicked things off again, calling for greater dialogue. Moving on to Gregorio Sorgi's panel on the long-term budget. Yeah, I was particularly interested by the Polish representatives' concerns about diverting funds to competitiveness and maybe away from cohesion, and whether some of the less affluent parts of the EU might end up losing out to the powerhouses. I also, wearing my other hat as agriculture editor, couldn't help pricking out my ears when Jan Straski of the OECD said, we really need to rationalize the common agricultural policy. Does it really support farms where the money is most needed? We need to simplify the cap for recipients and administrators. And our corporate guest from Lilly, that's Marcel Le Chanteur. Yeah, he looked through some of the rhetoric and the contortions we're seeing on tariffs from Trump, to make the point that it takes us several years to build manufacturing sites, it takes months to get regulatory approval. So we don't make those decisions in short order, but what he does say is that by any standard, the US regulatory decisions go much faster than in the EU. Well, you've just heard Catherine's interview and panel, so I won't reprise that. But what I will say before we break for lunch is to thank our speakers who participated this morning, as well as our moderators and crew. I'd also like to thank our partners for making the summit possible. So here we go again. Leading partners are ASML, Bayer, FPA, and Google. The presenting partners are Lilly, DP World, Revolut, and Santander. And the knowledge partner is the McKinsey Global Institute. We've had lots of food for thought this morning. Now we'll have actual food. Outside, we have a networking lunch set up to run. I guess we're running a few minutes late, but we should aspire, if possible, to get back by around 1:30. And I'd like to remind you that you can come and meet our product teams in the networking space. Our reporters, some of them are still running around chasing scoops, so please connect them with them when you can. And this afternoon, we'll turn our attention to Europe's strategy. A deeply important conversation and one that's been keeping EU decision makers awake at night. So let's talk about that. Have a wonderful lunch and happy networking, and see you afterwards. Thank you.
Are united in diversity. We are very heterogeneous in our opinion.
We are doing this in our open democracies. Discussion is all open and loud, and I'm not for that.
What is European Union?